очі востаннє на цей світ біленький, у смертну годину козак мовив так. Хай живе, живе вільна Україна, хай живуть вічно козаки, хай цвіте червона калина, нехай злинуть воріженьки на вічні віки, нехай злинуть воріженьки на вічні віки. Як вороги кляті нас на кіл саджали, як живцем палили, у смолі пекли. Козаки у хата життя не благали, про долю України думи їх були. Хай живе, живе вільна Україна, хай живуть вічно козаки, хай цвіте червона калина, нехай злинуть воріженьки на вічні віки, нехай злинуть воріженьки на вічні віки.
Прийшли окупанти до нас в Україну, форма новенька, воєнні машини, та трохи поплавився їх інвентар. Байрактар. Байрактар. Російські танкісти сховались в кущі, щоб лаптем посорбати довбані щі, та трохи у щах перегрівся навар. Байрактар. Байрактар. Зі сходу припхались до нас барани, для восстановлення великої страни, найкращий пастух баранячих отар. Байрактар. Байрактар. Їх доводи, всяке озброєння, різне, ракети, потужні машини залізні, у нас на всі доводи є коментар. Байрактар. Байрактар. Вони захопити хотіли нас зразу, і ми зачаїли на орків образу, з бандитів російських робить примар. Байрактар. Байрактар. Російська поліція справи заводить, на вбивцю рашистів ніяк не знаходить, хто ж винен, що в нашому полі глухар. Байрактар. Байрактар. Веде пропаганду кремлівський урод, слова пропаганди ковтає народ, тепер нове слово знає їх цар.
Браття! 'Браття!' 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 'Brаття!' 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 'Brаттya!' 'Brаттya
Hello everyone, I am the Enforcer, and welcome back to the Day 77 news of the past 24 hours of the war in Ukraine. Sadly, this map name was not updated. Let me do that real quick. But today is Day 77 of the war. It is something, honestly. This is rounding out another week of the war, and considering that Ukraine wasn't even expected to survive half of a week, the fact that we're now having to close out another week's map in this war says a lot. This is now the end of the 10th week, and tomorrow will be the start of the 11th week. And what better way to round out this week's news than to talk about the Kharkiv area and the imminent collapse that we've heard about today from many intelligence agencies around the world, from Britain, the United States, and other NATO countries, as evidence is now suggesting, which we've been seeing on the stream for a pretty good bit, that the Russian lines have almost collapsed in this area and they're about to go into a full rout or withdrawal. So we're actually going to get to that later on in the news tonight, but first, let's go over tonight's schedule. Starting off, we unfortunately, and I have to make this announcement, unfortunately, I was not able to source a speech for President Zelensky today, so sadly, we won't have the ending speech that we usually have, but do not fear, it will be on tomorrow's stream if it is available. Unfortunately, I just couldn't find one anywhere, and I may actually just try and pull it up at the end of the stream and see if it was somewhere else rather than where I usually look for them. We're then going to move straight into Russia. We're actually going to start off the news in Russia tonight, and we're going to cover the little bit of news that we've seen in Moscow. We're then going to move down to the location unknowns and cover all of the location unknowns in one large group. Right after that, we're going to start moving towards the Kharkiv area, but before we do, we're going to answer 3 questions from the chat. Also, I want to make a quick note that you don't have to send in a super chat to get your question answered. You can @ the Enforcer or @ Enforcer Matt in the chat, and that makes it much easier for Matthew to be able to find these questions and compile them. Matthew works around the clock behind the scenes to try and make sure that the Russian bots don't get past the Leaf Spring Army, and also to compile y'all's questions. And the way to help him out the most is to do @ Enforcer or @ Enforcer Matt, which highlights the question for him, and he sees it a lot quicker. So going back to the question segment, we'll answer 3 questions in between the location unknowns and the Kharkiv region. Then we'll move to the Kharkiv region, cover most of the news here in the Donbass, well actually all of it, before we move on to Mariupol, and then we'll take another pause once we get to the bottom of the Donbass region heading towards Mariupol, and we'll answer another 3 questions in the chat. We'll then cover the Mariupol news, the news from the southern front as a whole. There's actually been a pretty decent amount of news down here today, and then we're going to cover the international news because we have 2 major bits of international news today, one particularly pertaining to Finland and its future in NATO. So, without further ado, let's get right into the news. Starting off in Moscow, we can see that the Polish embassy was inked today by Russian citizens. They have the spirit, I just don't think they know what they're actually doing, you see, because they're throwing the red paint on, I think, the security checkpoint at the front of the Polish embassy. But I don't think they understand that that's what you do against the Russians, not against the Polish. The Polish aren't killing anyone right now. It's actually the Russians. So this is kind of a little backwards in a way. I think they need to kind of like reread the note cards that they had and make sure that they're throwing it at the right person. Then again, this could be them trying to throw out the waste after Mr. Lunchtime ate his last soldier. I'm not really sure, but still, I don't think these guys really have the right idea of what's going on in mind. With that, we're now going to move on to the next bit of news, and now we're actually going to move out of Russia and back to the location unknown news, where we can see that we actually have a pretty decent amount today. We have around 14 pieces of location unknown news. Not a lot, not terrible. Well, not great, not terrible, I guess is what I'm trying to say. But anyways, let's get to the first one. To start off tonight, since tonight is rounding out the end of a week, it's very important to go over the total losses of Russian personnel. Now, these numbers include the wounded as well. I'm not really sure where they source these numbers, but supposedly, and I want to make sure when I'm reading this. Let's see. Interesting. I want to make sure here real quick. I'm not really sure if this was verified by the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense, but let's see. Yes, that number would be accurate. According to the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense, as of today, the Russians have lost around 26,000 killed, 79,000 wounded, and 1,000 prisoners of war, bringing their lost personnel up to a total of 106,400, with an additional 1,400 being lost today. That, once again, is a total casualty figure, so that includes the killed and the wounded. A casualty in military terms generally means that a soldier is no longer able to fight. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're killed. Sometimes that just means they're wounded to the point that they are no longer in fighting condition and they're sent home. So we can see here that they've lost another 2 BTGs today, nearly in combat strength, and they have lost about half of their initial invasion force at this point, and that gives you a really good idea of how poorly this invasion is going for the Russians, considering that they've lost 10% of their initial invasion force killed, and over, let me make sure I'm getting this number correct in my head, 30% of their soldiers wounded. And so that gives you a grand total of around 40 to 50%-ish, somewhere in that ballpark. And that is rough. That's something that you really can't account for, considering that the Russians are stating clearly that they're using entirely contract soldiers instead of conscript soldiers. These losses may be irreplaceable in the Russian army, considering that a contract soldier is by default much more trained and much more competent than a conscript soldier. And if what the Russians have been saying is true, and that their entire invasion force was made up of almost all of the contract soldiers in their military, this means that the Russians are going to be running their military from now on after this war is over, much like some kind of a circus, because no one's really going to have an idea of what's going on anymore, because the few trained people, the few experienced people that they had in the Russian army are mostly dead now. Moving down from that, we can see that they've lost 2,856 armored combat vehicles. Now, that's a massive number. We can see that they've lost 1,187 main battle tanks, 528 artillery pieces, 199 aircraft, 160 helicopters, and 12 ships and boats. Now, something interesting here on this infographic is that it apparently gives us a percentage of what was intended for the invasion. And according to this, the Russians have lost 98.9% of their tank force that was in the initial invasion force. And they've also lost 98.5% of their armored personnel carriers. What does that tell us? That tells us that the Russians have been funneling in new vehicles, and those are the videos of those large trains that we've been seeing in Russia moving towards Ukraine with SPGs and tanks on them, and that was not trying to bolster their combat strength and actually add in the numbers. That's just trying to replace the losses of what they have right now. So I think you can get the pretty good idea that the Russians are doing poorly at best, and they're falling apart at worst. And I've just got to say, it's crazy to think that the Ukrainians have shot down 200 Russian aircraft. Apparently, that's 14.4% of the total aircraft that the Russians have in their entire military. So this is giving you a very good idea that the Russians cannot sustain these losses for much longer. We know in the Kharkiv area, it's getting particularly terrible. But with that, we're now going to move on to the next bit of location unknown news, where we can see that an M777 destroyed an SPG. A little bit of irony here. We're actually seeing an American artillery piece, and I know it's British design, but it's American used, so I'm going to say it's an American used artillery piece. We can actually see it destroying a Russian-made SPG. So you're actually seeing Western towed artillery going up against Eastern SPGs, which are, you know, just motorized artillery, and the M777 just decimated the SPG. I'm going to just let y'all see the video. It's, of course, pretty ironic in a way.
Гаубиця М777А2 готується до бойової роботи на сході України. Ось так виглядає ця потужна, грізна зброя. Зараз ми покажемо, як вона б'є російських окупантів. Надзвичайно висока точність, якість.
So you can see him talking about the M777. You can see that it's not actually being prepared to fire at the moment.
Великі втрати для російської армії. Готова до роботи. Всі системи працюють. Стан відмінний. Повністю готова до роботи. Працює постійно по російських окупантах.
And I love how this Ukrainian soldier is panning the camera down the length of the barrel like this is a car in some kind of Fast and Furious movie. Now, that's a movie that I have seen a little bit of. And it's funny to me because it seems almost like the Ukrainians are fawning over these artillery pieces. We've seen loads of videos of these things. And we know that in the large scheme of things, they actually don't make up a large number of the Ukrainian artillery force, but they are happy as punch to have these things in their inventory. And I would agree as well that I would be happy to have these things too. They're very capable artillery pieces, and they also use a large variety of laser-guided shells, which are, of course, much more accurate than your normal artillery shell. So anyways, I'm going to let the video continue.
Ефективність вогневого ураження дуже висока. З сучасними снарядами, з сучасними боєприпасами новітніми. Все це, ця гармата влучає з першого пострілу з дуже високою точністю. Перший постріл 20-30 метрів максимальне відхилення і одразу йде вогневе ураження ворога. Так що дякуємо нашим союзникам і дякуємо українським воїнам, які майстерно застосовують цю дуже потужну бойову техніку.
As we can see, this man is giving a Doug DeMuro style account of this M777 artillery piece, and I'm just eating this up. I mean, this is funny. I don't know what he's talking about, but this man is literally giving a sales pitch for this artillery piece, and that tells me that they're having a blast using them, and it must be an incredibly competent piece for them to be talking so much about it, considering that it's only been there for about a week. So anyways, I'm going to let the video continue.
Да, тут постійно йдуть артилерійські бої, і наші артилеристи завдають ворогу дуже важких втрат. Україна обов'язково переможе. Бойова робота української артилерії на передовій на сході України.
Now, real quick, we can see that the piece has been set up. He's still talking about it. I'm sure that in Doug DeMuro fashion, this man's about to walk up to the M777 and flip open an ashtray or something on the side and be like, look at this interesting quirk and feature. But all jokes aside, this man is in love with this artillery piece, and I really do hope that the Ukrainians can keep these or even buy more after the war, because if it's highly favored by the Ukrainian infantry over the Russian-made counterparts to this towed artillery piece, then I would love to, of course, see them have these, because they are much more competent than their Western counterparts. So with that, I'm going to let the video continue once more.
Українські артилеристи ведуть вогонь з американської новітньої гармати М777А2. Ціль – російська артилерійська батарея, яку зараз наші воїни готуються знищити.
As we can see, he's still looking at the piece. I mean, like, he's watching this thing. I'm going to skip. Wait a minute. Actually, we're not going to skip forward. We're going to go back. We can actually see that they finally fired the piece in this video after this man has given a YouTube quality introduction and sales pitch for this artillery piece. I gotta say, this man loves it, and I can't say that enough. You can tell just by the way he's like filming the piece that he is a huge fan of it. Anyways, the piece finally gets fired.
Перший постріл.
We can now see the Ukrainians preparing to reload the piece, it seems, or at least evacuate the barrel of the shell, or the casing. So we can now see them reloading the piece.
артилерійська дуель на Східному фронті. Українські артилеристи коригують вогонь, вносять поправки, виставляють новий приціл. Зараз буде ще постріл вже по уточнених координатах. І російська батарея, яка веде вогонь, буде знищена.
And I just like to correct something real quick. I see a lot of people saying that there is no casing. After I said that, I was like, there's probably no casing. I actually, if I'm remembering artillery procedures correctly, I believe that that was actually something similar to swabbing the barrel. I'm not entirely sure, though. I'm not an expert on this stuff by any means, but for some reason in my head, I was imagining that there was some kind of casing. So I want to correct that before we move on, and with that, we're going to let the video continue. And now we can see the video at the end of this clip showing the SPG that this M777 has hit and destroyed. So wonderful to know that this guy is not only just hyping up the M777, but is actually carrying through on this hype and actually hitting a SPG, a Russian SPG, dead on from miles away and destroying it instantly. I have to say, that's something really impressive when you think about it. And with that, that's the end of the video. We're now going to move on to the next bit of location unknown news, where we can see a T-90A being destroyed. Unfortunately, I have to mute the video. But you can see the drone looking through its thermal camera at this T-90. You can see it there. It's the right under the crosshairs at this point. We can now see the first bomblet hit the T-90. It appears that it may have caused some damage. And if it didn't cause considerable damage, the drone is about to drop a second bomblet on the T-90. This T-90 tank and its crew are not having a good day at all. I can promise you that. We can now see the second bomblet explode on the front of the tank, which appears to have caused some kind of embers or a small fire to start bouncing around near the rear of the turret. Well, the rear of the tank, at least, for a small second. So hopefully that tank was knocked out by the bomblets, and with that, we're going to move on to the next bit of location unknown news. Here in this clip, we can of course see more Ka-52 footage. This is one of the few clips of footage that we see the Russians uploading time and time again. Of course, a little bit different each time because each one is filmed brand new, but it seems to be the only thing that the Russians are proud of is the helicopter force because they continuously show it on film. So I'm going to let y'all see this clip. Now, what's crazy to me, I have to go back and tell you all this because I think y'all find this crazy as well if you didn't know. This gun on the Ka-52 is a 30mm gun. And I was like, okay, you know, that's cool. It's a big gun, but there's nothing really crazy about it. What's insane, though, is I actually found out that that 30mm gun and the 30mm gun that is mounted on the BMP-2, which is this vehicle right here, are the same gun. Now, that was something crazy that I found out just about 2 days ago, and I was like, there is no way that that's the case, because it seems incredibly cheap. If you ever look at an American vehicle that's designed, you know, by the Americans directly, it never does anything cheap like that, like taking a an armored personnel carrier's autocannon and then just strapping it onto a helicopter. Like the 30mm Gal and the A-10 Warthog was specifically designed for that aircraft. If you ever go and look at the AH-64 Apache, the chain gun it uses was specifically designed for that helicopter. But the Russians are so cheap, and it's because of their lack of a budget, that they'll just go and take a BMP gun off of a BMP-2, the 30mm autocannon, and just mount it to the side of a helicopter and say, hey, look, it's high-tech. Like, really? But anyways, I'm going to let the video continue. As we can see, they're now loading rockets into one of the rocket pods. We can also see that it's carrying some anti-tank guided missiles. We can now see the Ka-52 in this video taking off and flying away. It appears that there is a second Ka-52 following it that took off right after. We can now see it flying away, and we can see that these took off from a very large helicopter base that the Russians are operating in some unknown location. Hopefully we can get a location, because the Ukrainians, of course, would like to give it a visit and maybe let Mr. Lunchtime know that he won't be escaping. So With that, we can now see the footage of the Ka-52s striking a tree line, most likely with some kind of munitions, as we can see dark black pixels rising from the tree lines, which apparently the Russians are using an inverse infrared sensor. Usually hotter stuff shows up as white, but you can change the filters, or the actual interface can be different, where hot stuff shows up as a darker color. We can now see an Mi-17 flying over the helicopter base. We can now see the Ka-52s returning and landing at the helipad. Apparently, you know, according to the Russians, with a successful mission under their belts, although that's really questionable. We can now see the Mi-17 returning and landing at the helipad as well, although we really didn't see this Mi-17 being used in action. And with that, that's the end of the video. Although the Russians love to show that the helicopter forces are doing well, we know for a fact that the Russian helicopter forces are doing, for the most part, poorly. Every time we see them actually trying to engage Ukrainian ground units within visual range, they're usually shot down. So just keep that in mind. Of course, the Russians always put a spin on things, much like everyone puts a spin on everything. But still, the Russian spin is a little I guess you could say, untouched by reality. So we're just going to leave it at that, and we're now going to move on to the next bit of Location Unknown news. Here we can see a Ukrainian soldier enjoying coffee while being shelled, and this man is going to enjoy his coffee. So I'm going to let y'all see this clip. It is a little funny in a way how chill this guy is, especially being under artillery fire, but here's the video.
Прикинь.
What a guy. This guy is a pretty calm nerved guy. You could see his hand shaking though a little bit. And I got to give it to him. Although he is acting calm, of course, I know that he's probably scared to death inside, because having an artillery shell scream that close by you and then explode nearby, that's of course going to put anyone on edge. But that man handled this like a champ. And regardless whether his hand was shaking a little bit, I got to give it to this guy. He is a brave guy to just sit there and get back up and be like, wow, that was something, and then just start drinking a coffee. I don't know if I would do that in that situation, of course, because I've never been in a situation like that. But if I was, I could only wish to be as calm and collected as this guy is in this clip. We're now going to move on to the next bit of Location Unknown news, where we can see more Ka-52s in action on Russian videos. Let me make sure that this is, in fact... Yes, this is actually a little bit of a different perspective of the same video, and so that's why I put it in. Here we can see the Ka-52 from the front apparently started, and we can now see the crew climbing out of one of the Ka-52s in the last video. It appears that this was part of the last clip we didn't see. It was kind of divided up into two parts. For some reason, we could see one of the Russians molesting the Ka-52 here. I don't know what the exact point of rubbing his hand across the side of the helicopter is. I think he's longing for his inflatable doll. We can now see the Russian ground crews apparently reloading the rocket pods in this video. So now we can see kind of the video where it left off last time with the infrared camera footage of the strike on the tree line. But the rest of the footage before that was actually looking like it was post-sortie, kind of like maintenance and reloading in a way, if that makes sense. But I hope that y'all did enjoy that little joke there. I can see the live chat is going a little crazy with it. And so with that, we're now going to move on to the next bit of Location Unknown news, where we can see the remains of a shot-down Mi-24 burning in a Ukrainian village. So let me show y'all this real quick. Unfortunately, I have to keep it muted because it does have copyrighted music. But there you can see the burning wreckage of a Russian Mi-24. Once again, another helicopter that's been taken down by the Ukrainians, and another small victory that they can claim over Russia's air forces. I'm not saying that, of course, Russian helicopters are in the Russian Air Force, they're in the Russian Army, but still, it is something that operates in the air, so I'm calling it part of the air forces in general. With that, we're now going to move on to the next bit of location unknown news, where we can see a close call once again for Ukrainian troops as a Russian shell lands incredibly close. From the information we were able to collect, this is some kind of a 203mm Smerch. Bless me, sorry, but you can see a 203mm Smerch here exploding right behind them, and then they run down into the basement of a house for cover. A very reasonable reaction to this. And that was incredibly close. It's very good to see that none of the Ukrainian soldiers in this clip were wounded, but that was very close for comfort, and considering that it was part of an MLRS barrage, I think this video may have ended a little early, because there would have, of course, been preceding, missiles coming right after that one, considering that an MLRS is always fired in a barrage and not just a single missile at a time. With that, we're now going to move on to the next bit of location unknown news, where we can see a T-72B3 destroyed once again. The Ukrainians never give the T-72B3 crews a break, and I think that may have been one of the reasons why the armored column of the Russian Victory Day Parade this year was so small, because this is where most of them are. They're in a Ukrainian field just burning. So I'm going to let y'all see this video.
Подбили только что. Все, плюс. Я наблюдаю, как он ходит. Сейчас должен уже остановиться. Сука, горит и едет. А ну отходите все, сейчас БК будет работать. Фух. Все, плюс приняли, сейчас он остановится еще чуть-чуть. Так, кто? Все. Есть еще РПГ? Есть у меня. Давай, неси. Все, плюс добиваем сейчас. На, сука, пидор горит. Что там? Что на поле? А ну, Тёма, победитель танков, нахуй, сука. Красава. А це уже по нам. Воздух! Куда хуяли? По наших? Нет.
So, of course, a very interesting video. We did see a T-72B3 knocked out in the field and burning. I have seen a couple of people saying that this clip is a few weeks old, but I have not seen this clip until today, and so it did get put down in the Day 77 news, because I scour the internet far and wide to find the clips that I've got, and I didn't see this one a while ago. So I'm going to err on the side of caution and say that it may not be from today, just because some people are saying that, but still, it came over on today's radar for me, and so it did get in the Day 77 news. With that, we're going to move on to the next clip of Location Unknown News, where we can see the Ukrainian Special Forces giving a small puppy water. This was a very precious little video, and of course, it is a good break from the monotony of the destruction and the doom and gloom that sometimes comes with war. So here's the video of this little puppy getting some water. Of course, I have to mute it because it has copyrighted music, but look at that little thing. That is precious. I don't know what kind of puppy this is, but I want that puppy. That's a very sweet little puppy right there. And also, it's very appreciative for the water. And it's good to know that the Ukrainian Special Forces are also taking care of the dogs as well, because we know that the Ukrainian Special Forces have been used in largely high-stress environments, like behind the lines and almost partisan-like activity from what we've been able to collect on video. And the fact that they stopped to give this little dog some water says a lot about their character. And so I'm very happy to see that, and it is wonderful to know that the Ukrainian Special Forces also cares for the pets of Ukraine as well. With that, we're now going to move on to the next bit of Location Unknown News, where we can see a bomb explodes nearby. Oh, wait a minute, that's the same video. Apparently I put it down twice. This one was a little bit shorter, so correction. We're going to move on from that to the next bit of location unknown news, where we can see the Ukrainians getting a Lend-Lease vehicle. Now, I was told personally that this may be Operator Starsky's new car. But let's check it out and see what they got with the Lend-Lease. I have to mute it because it does have copyright music, and I just want everyone to know in advance, this is, of course, a joke, and the Ukrainians set this up as a joke. So just letting you know, but here's the video. It's like a tuk-tuk. But I like it. That's a pretty funny joke. I like that the Ukrainians do have a sense of humor, and they are spending a little bit of time constructing some of these jokes. And I have to say, the delivery was on point. I love that. It was great. Of course, the Ukrainians aren't using that thing in combat. They're actually using much better stuff than a tuk-tuk, pretty much. And so with that, we're now going to move on to the next bit of Location Unknown News, where we can see that a Russian tank crew believe they could fly, as their turret has now become the closest thing to space that the Russians have launched since the start of the war, considering that Roscosmos has been sanctioned into oblivion and is no longer able to launch rockets. So this Russian tank crew appears to have gotten as close to space as anyone else has in Russia, and so let's watch the video. And so this car driver is moving forward, and right in front of him is a Russian tank. And you're about to watch that Russian tank become a Russian spacecraft. And there goes the turret. That turret's at least 500 feet in the air right there. And it went straight up like it was in a space program. And I've got to say, now that's a rare video. And that's insane to see a tank get blown up like that and see its turret fly so high. You always heard stories in World War II by fighter pilots that sometimes, well, not just fighter pilots, sometimes ground attack pilots like the P-47 Thunderbolt, that whenever they would commit an attack on a German tank, and the tank would brew up and explode, sometimes the turret would actually fly up high enough that they were concerned of running into it. And those were very few instances. Let's make that clear. That wasn't like something that was a reoccurring issue. But at the same time, there is historical recordings of that happening. But what's insane is to see that happen in a modern war in such a fashion like that. So that was a very wild video, a very rare one, as a matter of fact. And so we're going to move on to the last bit of Location Unknown News, where we can see the interior of a 2S1 operated by Ukraine in operation. So let's take a look at this video, and let's see how the inside of one of these tanks works. Well, one of these SPGs, more accurate statement. We're now going to go to Twitter and watch it from here. So, correction, everyone. There we go. We can now see them loading the shell.
заряджений, наведений, готовий.
Let's go.
We can now see that they fired the shell.
Деня, давай.
We can now see them ram the shell down the breech. We can now see them loading the propellant and firing the shell firing the shot once more.
What's up? Заряжай. Давай. Welcome to Ukraine.
They're having a fun time firing the piece, and I gotta say, that's of course always fun to see. But one thing I've got to say is that this thing has pretty much turned into a hot box in there. I'm sure that if they aren't smokers, they're about to become one, because there is so much smoke inside of this turret right now that if they fire this gun 2 or 3 more times, they're not going to be able to see their hands in front of their face anymore. But still, it's good to see that they're pretty hyped up. They have a high morale, of course, much like normal Ukrainian soldiers, and that they are doing their duty to defend their nation, and they're having a great time doing it. So that is the end of the video. With that, we're now going to move towards the Kharkiv region. But before we actually get there and start covering the news from that particular region, we're going to answer 3 questions from the chat and then return back to the news. And so with that, what do we got, Matthew?
All right, and good evening, everybody. It's Enforcer Matt once again. And first up tonight, we have a question from Raphael Harris, who puts in a $16 donation And it says, Enforcer, do you think they should put Zelensky on the 500 hryvnia bill?
I believe I actually answered that question last night. My answer is yes. I believe that there is a good way to remember the man, either through statues, which a lot of people are starting to move away from statues, which, I guess is just my trend. I still think statues are kind of cool, and, I think they respect important historical figures very well. But I believe that an incredibly good way to recognize him for being such a influential statesman in Ukraine is to put his face on a Ukrainian bill. So I highly agree with that, and I do thank you very much for the support. I hope that does answer the question. And once again, I'd like to let everyone know that your support to the channel does, of course, help us out a whole load. It helps us to continue keeping the lights on and also running these streams like we normally do. So thank you all once again for your support. And we will get to everyone's question that's in a super chat by the end of the night. And we'll also be getting to some live chat questions as well. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next, we are paid a visit by the Sockeye Salmon. S. Moore puts in a $15 donation and says, Marvelous Meredith, the blue-eyed sockeye salmon, says, why does the Russian army not collect their dead? Ukraine is running out of refrigerated cooler capacity. Ceasefire and exchange war dead, question mark? That would be more civilized.
Well, I thank you very much for the support. And to answer that question, we're not entirely sure why the Russians don't pick up their dead. One of the reasons explained is because they don't actually want their civilian population to know how bad the war is going, so they just don't even pick up the bodies to have to worry about sending them home in the first place. The second option is that they don't have the ability to remove the bodies from the field, or they get pushed back so bad the bodies are now out of their reach. Out of those two options, and of course there are more options, but I believe those are the two leading ones at the moment. Out of those two options, I would say that the second one seems to be more likely, considering that their logistics are falling apart. And so I'm sure that since they don't even have the ability to properly feed and supply their soldiers, they're not really going to do a lot for the dead anyways. But I do thank you very much for the support, and I hope that does answer the question. And with that, we're going to move on to the last question of this segment, and then we're going to move on to the Kharkiv and Donbass news.
And the last one of the segment goes to Manuel Suezo, who puts in a $12 donation and says, greetings from the south side of the Leaf Spring Army in Chile.
Well, thank you very much for the support, and it's good to hear from some reports from our brave soldiers down there in South America. Of course, we have soldiers in the Leaf Spring Army from around the entirety of the world who have done their duty to support Ukraine and also be proud members of this Leaf Spring Army. And once again, I'm super proud of everyone who's been doing this Leaf Spring Army thing with me. It started off as a joke, and now it's kind of become a very serious, well-put-together community of people who are very invested in Ukraine's success. And hopefully in the future, we can use the Leaf Spring Army for supporting other causes as well. Like if another war breaks out somewhere around the world, we could cover that, and I've been thinking about that, and I hope that the Leaf Spring Army will continue on for the rest of all time. And so with that, I do thank you very much for the support. It's good to hear that you are from Chile. That's a pretty neat country. A whole bunch of interesting history has occurred down there. And with that, we've reached the end of this question segment. We will return to a question segment down here before we get to Mariupol. But as of right now, we're now going to move on to the Kharkiv news and the Donbass news in general. Starting off south of Kharkiv, we can see that the Ukrainian tractor has been hit by Russian forces. According to the caption, it was hit by a Russian missile, which is incredibly interesting because I didn't think that the Russians would ever target a tractor, but it seems like they're getting pissed off that the Ukrainian farmers are stealing their equipment to the point they're now going to start attacking tractors as well. Apparently, the 26-year-old who was operating this tractor was not injured severely. He did suffer some burns, but beyond that, he is okay. So here's the video of the Ukrainian tractor burning in the field. So I guess you could say that is pretty heinous, honestly. I mean, I'm trying to think about how to put this into words, but it's pretty clear that this was a tractor. It had a till, or a plow, whatever you'd like to call it, on the rear of the tractor. Tanks can't attach those. And obviously, you can tell the distinctive shape of a tractor versus an armored personnel carrier or a tank. So the fact that the Russians actually hit this tractor with any kind of munitions is clear evidence of Russian soldiers directly targeting civilians and civilian infrastructure. And so with that, we're now going to move on to the Kharkiv region, where we can see that hopefully the Russians will not be able to continue doing this for long, in the Kharkiv region in particular, as we have gotten major news today that the Kharkiv front is collapsing. Unfortunately, we do not have any video evidence to show that today, but we have been noticing and seeing on this stream video evidence over the past week indicating that the Kharkiv front is most likely collapsing due to these strong counterattacks by the Ukrainians, paired with the weak defensive positions of the Russians, along with a poor logistical connection to their supply hubs, and also the lack of training overall in their military units. They are starting to see that the front lines are collapsing and falling apart. And according to reports today by the British Ministry of Defense and the United States Department of Defense, it appears that the Ukrainians may be able to push the Russians back to the border very soon, within the next week or two, which of course I'm looking forward to. And we will also be trying to get as much video evidence as possible from this area to continue up on this news. That is of course the reason why our thumbnail is the way it is tonight, and also our title, because this is large news. And this means that the Russians will now have lost all of their land holdings that they had originally at the beginning of the opening weeks of the war, that is west of the Donetsk River, and that's going to be a huge deal. And with that, we're now going to move on to another bit of news from this particular area that is showing a very interesting turn of events in this area. Of course, we know that it's falling apart, but we didn't know it was falling apart this bad. We can actually see that a bridge was destroyed by the Ukrainian forces in this area that was apparently set up by the Russians to cross the Donetsk River. And that sounds like some copyrighted music, so of course we'll have to mute that. But here you can see a pile of destroyed Russian tanks and a destroyed, I guess you could say, pontoon bridge right there across the Donetsk River. It appears that it was at one of its less wide and more narrow points, and it does show you that the bridge crossings that the Russians have been placing have been poorly planned out and are apparently very vulnerable to attacks by the Ukrainians, either by drone or artillery. And what's interesting to me is that the Ukrainians had just spotted this pontoon bridge the other day on satellite images that were given to them by, of course, Western nations. And they started saying, we're kind of concerned about that. That's a big deal that they have a pontoon bridge there. And now I can see that it was destroyed within 24 hours. I, of course, didn't put this on the news yesterday because just spotting a pontoon bridge isn't that big of a deal. They've done that multiple times before. And so, trying to weigh out the importance of news, I was like, that can wait. We'll just wait until it either gets destroyed or becomes a linchpin part of this war. And we can now see that it was actually destroyed before the latter could come true. So I'm very happy to see that. And we actually have some pictures of the raw carnage that occurred on one side of this pontoon bridge. It was an absolute slaughterhouse. The Russian vehicles were destroyed on top of each other. I can't it's unbelievable to actually see it. Once this video ends, we're going to go to those pictures because y'all have to see this. It was insane how many Russian vehicles were piled up on one side of this pontoon bridge. And so here's those pictures that I'm talking about. Look at this. It's a graveyard of tanks. All of these were destroyed on one side of where this pontoon bridge once was. You can still see the remnants of it right here where my mouse cursor is circling. We can see a T-80U, most likely, right here. We can see some other kind of vehicle. I'm not really sure what kind. It looks like it may be a BMD-4. We can also see the remnants of what appear to be a BMP-1 or a BMP-2 right here. 3 more Russian main battle tanks in this one spot. Another Russian main battle tank. Looks like it's a T-80, halfway submerged in the water. And then finally, some other armored personnel carrier. It looks like it may be a BMP of a sort, BMP-1 most likely, that was also destroyed in this one location. And it also looks like there may even be another Russian vehicle out here in the middle of the Donetsk River. I can't really tell for sure, but that one is so far submerged, most likely in this muddy sediment that makes up the Donetsk River, that recovering it is going to be difficult, if not impossible. And I'm sure the Russians will have that as the least of their worries, considering that it looks like an entire BTG was wiped out on one side of this pontoon bridge alone. And y'all have got to agree with me. That's insane. That's something I've never seen before. This is something you would see in like a fake war movie, of the level of destruction that's occurred in a single spot, and yet we're seeing it in real life. And that's telling you how effective Ukrainian artillery and drone strikes are, and it's also giving us an incredibly good idea of how terrible the Russians are at planning anything. This pontoon bridge was apparently set up in a very vulnerable position with almost no defenses, and then the Russians bottlenecked a whole load of vehicles on one side of this pontoon bridge to get destroyed one by one. You just can't make this stuff up. It's insane, honestly. And I hope we see more stuff like this, because if the Ukrainians can keep up this kind of destruction at a single pontoon bridge, they're going to win this war in about a week. So with that, we're going to move on to the next picture, which actually shows you a better image of the entire picture of this destroyed pontoon bridge. We can actually see that it looks like there were two pontoon bridges crossing over the Donetsk River from one side to the other. We can see that there's some kind of KAMAZ truck over here that seems to be largely intact, but still, the slaughter that occurred on the other side of that river is something for the ages. I mean, that's nuts. Like, if you actually sat there and counted out the crew members for those vehicles, let's go back to that. We're going to assume 3 for the BMP, 3 for this BMD, or whatever it may be, 3 for this other BMP. We're already up to 9, 12, 15, 18, 21, and then we'll say 2 for this MTLB. 23 crew members that were operating Russian tanks may have been killed. You know, of course, that's the truth. They may have been killed. But at the same time, not only were these guys possibly killed, but those are tankers that may have been wounded, and they may never enter the war again. And so just in terms of the actual personnel losses and how difficult that's going to be for the Russians to actually replace, that's going to be very tough for them right there as well, just in this one picture alone. And so we're going to skip to the last picture, where we can actually see a very detailed look of these pontoon bridges, and we can actually see what appears to be holes in them, most likely from artillery strikes that hit directly onto the pontoon bridges themselves. And I've just got to say, I have a huge respect for the Ukrainian artillery. I feel like this was most likely done by an artillery barrage. If I had to make an assumption on what it may be, it appears that that would be the most reasonable assumption. Bayraktars, of course, are very effective, but at the same time, they carry a limited number of munitions, and so I do not believe that a single Bayraktar could inflict this much damage on Russian ground forces in this one spot. It would have to be multiple Bayraktars operating at the same time, or it'd have to be a very precise and very heavy short artillery barrage, one or the other. Of course, I'm not going to say which one's which. I feel like it was most likely artillery, but at the same time, it could have been a Bayraktar strike or some other kind of drone operation. With that, we're now going to move out of the Kharkiv area, and you can see that the news coming out there is huge. You can't make up the amount of progress that the Ukrainians are making in that area, and hopefully they can continue to keep the upper hand. Of course, I do have to say, while the Ukrainians have been on the upper hand here in the Kharkiv area for about a week, wars, of course, can change. Wars are very fluid. It's not always going to be that the Ukrainians are winning, and it's not always going to be that the Russians are losing. Something can change, and so right now, the Ukrainians do have the upper hand, but they could lose it depending on the decisions they make or the decisions that the Russians make. So right now, they do have the upper hand, and they are pushing the Russians back, and it looks like the Russian front lines are nearing collapse. So we're, of course, going to keep a huge eye on this situation here in the Kharkiv front. I think this is going to be one of the ultimate death nails in this war for the Russians. If they lose this area, which is the last area of land they hold around the two major Ukrainian cities that they went for at the start of this war, this tells you that they pretty much lost all hope of doing anything meaningful throughout the rest of this war, at least in my assessment and my assumptions. With that, we're now going to move further down the front line towards the Izium area, where you can see that the Ukrainian 25th Brigade committed a Stugna attack today. Stugna, however you'd like to pronounce it. They conducted an HEGM attack with our favorite anti-tank system and wiped out another Russian tank. As you can see, the tank is already burning, and it appears that they're probably going to hit it twice now to make sure that it is good and dead. You know, they always say in the U.S. Army, kill stuff more deader, and I think that the Ukrainians here are going to definitely try that. Now we can see them pointing at the tank, and they're like, look, it's burning. And I've got to say, it looks like it'd be something nice to cook some marshmallows over. I wonder if y'all can agree with me on that, but still, very impressive that the 25th is continuing to knock out Russian vehicles, because we actually gotten some news yesterday that the 25th was knocking out Russian vehicles then, and we can see that it's still carrying over into today. So I don't know if that's evidence of a Russian attack that is now failing, or evidence of a Ukrainian counterattack that is succeeding. We'll have to wait for more news to come out to see which it is, but right now it looks like they're holding the line right here. With that, we're now going to move past the Izium area. We have not gotten any news there today, although heavy fighting has been going on there for the entire week. We don't really know the results of it right now. We do know that it appears it is most likely a stalemate, as neither the Ukrainians nor the Russians have made any considerable ground or done any considerable I guess you could say, moves on the other, such as an encirclement or anything like that. And so it appears that there's just a massive amount of fighting here, but the Ukrainians are holding their ground. And as long as the Ukrainians hold their ground, this is pretty much a victory for Ukraine. So we will be keeping an eye out on this information and seeing if anything does change. But we're now going to move further down the front. And of course, we're going to give an homage to Mr. Lunchtime. Mr. Lunchtime, of course, was on here yesterday. I've had a lot of requests for people to see him again. And since y'all love Mr. Lunchtime, I'm going to let y'all see Mr. Lunchtime one more time. Although this was yesterday's news, I'm going to show it because I, of course, am I'm of course a huge fan of everyone talking about Mr. Lunchtime. So with that, we're going to show Mr. Lunchtime once more.
В этот день хочется пожелать всем мира, здоровья, счастья. Отдельно поздравляем жителей населенных пунктов Светлодарск и Луганская. И посылаем им поздравительные открытки. Подождите, дорогие, мы скоро придем и освободим вас от фашистско-националистической чумы.
We can see that
Огонь!
Mr. Lunchtime is once again preparing the afternoon dinner meals for the Ukrainians, and it's good to see that Mr. Lunchtime is, of course, well fed and ready to go. Maybe Mr. Lunchtime is Mr. Washing Machine. Maybe he has a washing machine under his coat. I'm not entirely sure, but I just wanted to show y'all Mr. Lunchtime again because I know that he is in popular demand right now. So we're now going to return back to the news, and we're now going to move to the area of Popasna, where today we've seen that the Smiley tank that was once in Mariupol here on film has actually now been moved down to Popasna itself, and we can now see the Smiley tank in action once again. And some of you who may be new to the stream are wondering, what is Smiley tank? Smiley tank is a tank that we've noted a while ago to have a little smiley face drawn onto the gunner's hatch. And so this is Smiley tank, but we've now seen it in the Popasna area, and so we know that this tank and its unit have moved to this location. We can now see Smiley tank moving and firing. We can still see that Smiley tank has the ventilation problem. The ventilation problem has not been fixed. Once that gun fires, it looks like a hotbox is just unfolded inside of that tank. And so with that, that is the end of that video, but Smiley Tank has now moved to Popasna, and hopefully we'll see the end of Smiley Tank very soon. With that, we're now going to move to the area of Kramatorsk, where today we've seen an attack very reminiscent of weeks ago in Rubizhny, where we saw a nitric acid tank explode, and everyone remembers the nitric acid coke joke. That's been brought up a few times even still. In Kramatorsk today, we've seen that the same attack has been carried out, as an ammonium nitrate tank has exploded, leaving that same kind of color. Well, actually, nitric acid was the tank that exploded in Rubizhny. So let me make that clear. This is ammonium nitrate, a little bit of a more different substance, but it still has that same yellowish, orangish tint to it that the nitric acid had in Rubizhny. And so with that, that is the end of the video. Of course, I'm not really a huge expert on ammonium nitrates or nitric acid in general. I actually thought that nitric acid went inside of Cokes, and then we pulled it up, and it definitely does not go inside of a Coke or any kind of citrusy flavored drinks. So make sure not to try that at home, y'all, because that's not a smart idea. But we can see that another ammonium nitrate tank has been hit inside of Kramatorsk, and hopefully its toxic plume that we see here on this video gets carried eastwards over into Russia instead of westwards and over Ukraine, because of course that would not be a good scenario. We're now going to move further down the front lines, and we're now going to get to the area around Donetsk itself, where today we've seen that the Russians have shelled the Ukrainian trenches in Donetsk once more, as they are trying to make some kind of progress here. But once again, I do have to remind everyone that the entire front line from the bottom of the coastline from Donetsk all the way up here to the corner near Luhansk is an absolute fortress. Well, it used to be in the areas that Russia now controls. It was an absolute fortress in between both sides, as both sides had heavily entrenched themselves and actually had built large World War I era-like trench works all over the front. And so we've seen that beyond the Russians kind of moving past the entrenchments and having the Ukrainians have to get out of them and retreat to make sure they're not encircled, they have not been able to break through these heavily fortified areas yet. And it's actually going to take Russian forces moving behind them and kind of flanking them for the Ukrainian forces to abandon their positions on these heavily defended lines. And we can see that the Russians are still trying to break them up. In vain, of course. We've seen that they have not made any progress. And in fact, the Ukrainians have had limited success in their counterattacks recently, as they have retaken the village of Marinka about a week ago. We can now see the Ukrainian forces moving down the length of the trench. And we can see that while the Russians have tried to wipe out Ukrainian forces in this trench, it appears that they were largely unsuccessful. And we know that the Ukrainians still hold on to their heavily fortified lines in the Donetsk and Luhansk regions. With that, we have now covered all of the news in the Kharkiv and Donbass area, and so we're now going to start moving down towards the Mariupol area. But before we do, we're going to take 3 questions from the chat, so everyone stick around. We're once again going to get back to the news, but I would like to recognize some of our supporters. And also, before we move on to this question segment, I would like to say welcome back to one of the viewers that have been wondering what's happened to. Speed Break was around for an incredibly long time. He was a cultural monolith on this channel. Like, his existence was part of this live chat. And I was always happy to see him, and of course, he always gave us a coffee funding, which of course I found hilarious and pretty funny. But what I found better was that he enjoyed these streams a lot, and he was always an active member of this community, both in the Discord and on the YouTube channel. After a bit, he disappeared, and I didn't know what happened to him. But tonight, we can see that he is back in the chat, and so I once again want to give a huge welcome back to Speedbreak, who has been a longtime channel viewer and a longtime channel supporter. So welcome back, Speedbreak. It's good to see you back, and I hope that you're all right. I've seen something about you may have been sick, and so I hope that you weren't incredibly sick, and I hope you got over it just fine. And so once again, welcome back. It's good to see you, and with that, we're going to move on into the question segment. And with that, what is our first question, Matthew?
And yes, welcome back, Speed Break. You've been on this channel forever. I remember back when you were called a completely different username, and now you're known as Speed Break. So yeah, welcome back again. It's good to have you. First up, we have a $50 donation from Sweet Walt, who says, 100-day war, over/under.
I don't know exactly what that's meaning. 100-day war over / I'm not exactly sure what you mean by that. If you're saying that the 100-day war will be over, it may be over before 100 days. I'm not hedging any bets anymore. I think the Russians are actually going to start trying to prolong it since it's going so poorly for them and start a war of attrition. But at the same time, maybe it'll end before 100 days. The Russians can't keep up these kinds of losses. And now we're hearing that the economy inside of Russia may be starting to collapse as well, as they're starting to default on loans that they had taken out to kind of artificially inflate their currency. So, of course, we'll be keeping an eye out on the situation, seeing if the war will be coming to an end before 100 days. So I thank you very much for the support, and I hope that that does address the comment or the question in a way. But thank you once again, and with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $20 donation from Kaltenberg, who says, keep going, Enforcer, and Slava Ukraine.
Well, I thank you very much for the support. And of course, I made a promise that at the beginning of this war, I was going to report every single day of the news until the end of this war. And so if this war even lasts 3 years, I'm going to be here reporting it every single day. So as long as there is a single soldier with breath in his body fighting for Ukraine, this channel will be running. So thank you so much once again. I'm, of course, trying to deliver as much news as possible. Unfortunately, some of y'all may have noticed that there was no short clip today. There was no summary of Day 77's events, and that's because I once again went out and filmed. This time, I threw out the script. I just talked freely, kind of like I do here on stream, and just filmed it. And so hopefully it turned out really good. We're, of course, going to go through the editing and just fix it up and make it into our first video. It may be out within a week or two, and that's also going to be my face reveal. And a lot of y'all have been wondering what I look like, and y'all are going to figure it out then. So I hope y'all are looking forward to it. Hopefully I don't disappoint y'all or anything. But with that, I thank you so much for the support once again. And with that, we're going to move on to the last question of the segment, and then we're going to return to the Southern Front news, and then wrap up tonight's stream with the question segment, and also the international news as well. And so with that, what is the last question?
And real quick, Enforcer, I want to return to Sweet Walt's super chat. He said 100-day war over and under. I've seen many users say that he meant in a betting sense. Like, do you think it's going to be a 100-day war, like over or under in a betting sense?
Oh, yes. Well, I'm sorry about that, y'all. But to correct my answer there and more accurately assess it, I believe that this will actually be over 100 days long for sure. I don't think it'll be under, although there is always a chance. The Russian economy, like I said, is doing incredibly poorly, and that's what a country really has to look at is pretty much their income situation. If they are falling apart economically, wars cannot continue. And so I think that's going to be in the whole entire situation, what everything's going to be revolving around. And based off of that, reaching another month of fighting and losses like they have been pretty much undergoing during this war doesn't really look like it's a viable option for them. But then again, I think it may be over 100 days. That's my assessment of the situation. So I thank you once again for the support. I hope that does answer the question. And with that, we're going to move on to the last question of the segment, and then we're going to return to the Southern Front news.
And the last one of the segment goes to Speed Break. He puts in a $12 donation and says, Coffee Fund.
Hey, Speed Break is back in the flesh. He's putting in the coffee funds again, and I thank you so much, Speed Break. We will make sure to get some coffees. We actually get coffees every single night. I know a lot of people know that now, but one thing I was thinking, and I saw this in the chat, and I thought this was a hilarious idea, is that if we did a coffee blend, you know, here on the channel, and we sold it as like Enforcer coffee. One thing that was crazy to me is that someone said the T72 brew, and I was laughing at that one, and I said that was actually pretty smart. I'll have to think about, does that kind of cross my line about Ukrainian war merch in a way or not, but I thought that was a genius idea for a coffee blend name. And so with that, I thank you so much once again, Speed Break, for the coffee fund. I'm going to make sure to use it. And so with that, that is the end of this question segment, and it was ended on a high note. Speed Break is back, everyone. And with that, we're now going to return back to the news in Mariupol and the Southern Front as a whole. Starting off in Mariupol, the Azovstal still holds on day 77 of this war. And so, can't make this stuff up, folks. The Azov is made of something special. The Russians have now breached the defensive perimeter for nearly a week, and they still have not managed to actually wipe out the Azov defenders. In fact, it looks like they still have some kind of internet connection, and that they're still reaching the outside world. Here we can actually see one of the female soldiers in Mariupol talking to the camera, and we can actually have a speech-to-text translation at the bottom of the video. So I'm not going to interrupt you, I'm just going to let y'all hear her speak, and also see the translation on screen, and then we'll move on to the next bit of news.
А можна сказати, що я прострелю коліно тому, хто поширює інформацію, що мене вже немає? Народ, воюємо, я ще всіх вас переживу. Маріуполь, ми тут їбашимося, ну ви що, яке 200? Давайте там трохи зберіться, народ, зберіться, давайте.
Що, як тобі, Азовсталь? В місті Маріуполі, бля.
Ну, єдине, що точно можу сказати, що тримається, і підрам не по зубах. Поки вони тут, ми їбашимося до останнього.
Казала солістка, як там, першого українського?
Да, солістка єдиного і неповторного.
Маріупольського хору на Азовсталі. Розказуй ще щось
Та блін,
цікаве.
я не знаю,
Ти
що говорити.
тепер зірка,
І
блядь.
камеру...
Ти тепер зірка, тебе знає
Та
весь світ.
зірка. Зірки згоряють, а ми будемо жити вічно, народ. Ну,
Та-та.
як і Маріуполь, Україна. Це назавжди.
Of course, a very high morale soldier, and it is very rare actually to see a woman fighting in the Ukrainian armed forces. We haven't seen a lot of instances of that on film, and here we can actually see a rare example of that. And she's got to be one of the toughest soldiers in the entire Ukrainian army, but she is in fact in the Azovstal, which is an absolute hell on earth right now. And so, got to give huge credit to her for keeping up such high morale under such arduous and strenuous situations such as this, and so I hope she continues to fight on with her comrades and hold the Azovstal until the end of this war. Of course, a massive accomplishment considering that the Russians have made the defense of the Azovstal that much more difficult, yet the Azov and the 36th Infantry Brigade still persist in their defense. And absolutely admirable. Moving on from that to the next bit of news, we can see some of the famous faces of Mariupol, and we can actually see her pop up again in this picture clip. Here we can see the co-commander of the Azov battalion that we've seen on film every once in a while. This is his, I guess you could say, before invasion picture, and this is his in invasion picture. You can see that his beard's grown out a little bit. Of course, they haven't been able to shave all too well in the Azov. In the Azovstal and Mariupol in general. Here we can actually see the commander of the Azov battalion. His name is Denis Prokopenko. I'm sorry if I mispronounced that, but I would like to read their names, and I'll go back and read Sviatoslav Polymer. Hopefully I pronounced that correctly. Once again, sorry if I did, but I would like to try and say their names to give them the credit they deserve for being such admirable and heroic fighters. Here we can see his before invasion picture and his nowadays picture, his up-to-date picture. Of course, they all look like they've been through hell. You can kind of tell it in their expressions. They are worn out. You can tell that it is getting to them a little bit, but they never falter, and they keep on going. And to just think about the absolute drive in someone to keep on going through what they're doing, you've got to say that these people are something else. Moving on to the next one, we can see Sergij Volensky. I'm sorry if I mispronounced that. I know I'm mispronouncing that one for sure. But here you can see his before invasion picture and his nowadays invasion picture. I have not actually seen this guy on film before, but apparently he is one of the higher up commanders inside the Azovstal right now. So of course, with everyone else, I do wish him the best of luck. The man is fighting as hard as everyone else, and he deserves as much credit as the next. We're now going to move on to the next picture, where we can actually see the girl we saw in the video a second ago. Katerina Pashka, I believe. I believe the T may be silent. I'm not entirely sure, but we can see her before invasion picture and her nowadays picture. Of course, the war takes a toll on everyone, but the fact that they keep on fighting is what counts. And so this is the face of a hard, determined, well-fighting soldier that the whole entire world should admire and be proud of for their fighting prowess. Finally, we're going to move on to the last picture, where we can see Ilya Semyolenko. I believe is how his last name may be pronounced. Once again, I'm sorry if I'm butchering these. I know I am, but I do want to say their names as best as I can to make sure to give them as much credit as possible. I do think their names should be said a lot more often, actually, if, of course, they can be pronounced somewhat competently. But here we can see him before the invasion and now. Apparently his eye has been injured sometime between this picture and this one, but I guess the bright side out of it is that he looks that much more intimidating with the eye patch. So, those are some of the most famous faces inside of the Azovstal right now, and they didn't become famous because they're some kind of movie star or they did something inconsequential. These people have been defending the indefensible, and that's how they become famous, and I believe that their faces should be seen around the world and their names said as people talk about brave heroes of history and fighters who went above and beyond. With that, we're now going to move on to the next bit of news from inside of the Azovstal, where we can see black smoke rising out of the center of the complex. We're not exactly sure what this is from. It looks like some kind of oil fire. This does, of course, have that usual black, thick smoke look that an oil fire has, but I don't know if any oil storage is within the metallurgical plant, so I'm not really sure about that information. That's just an assumption. But we can see a thick black plume of smoke billowing out of the Azovstal, but we're not really sure what it's from. So with that, we're now going to move on to the last bit of news from inside the Azovstal today, where we can once again see another soldier in the Azovstal. And so I'm going to let y'all just see this video. I'm not really going to talk over it. And so here it is.
Всех приветствую. Я бы хотел, чтобы вы все прониклись и поняли, насколько тяжело и сложно сейчас нашим бойцам, раненым, которые находятся в исключительно ужаснейших условиях полной антисанитарии. У бойцов нет антисептиков, у бойцов нет бинтов, нет даже зеленки с йодом. Уже просто все на остатках, там дезинфицируют спиртом, раны у ребят гниют. Это все максимально просто печально. Нужна действительно квалифицированная медицинская помощь людей. Нужно вывести в медучреждения и клиники. И я надеюсь, что мировое сообщество наконец-то встрепенется и заберет наших 300-х героев, наших раненых бойцов, которые заслуживают на то, чтобы им оказали все-таки достойную медицинскую помощь.
And so we could see him, of course, pleading for the sake of the rest of the defenders with him inside of the Azovstal for better treatment, at least for the wounded. We've seen a lot of that coming out of the Azovstal from the other Azov soldiers, as they do have a large care and concern for each other's well-being. So hopefully they can get those soldiers the care they deserve, considering that they have been fighting well beyond what anyone expected them to do. And so hopefully they can. With that, I don't know how much longer the Azovstal will hold. Once again, we've always tried to put some estimates on how long it will hold based off of historical precedents, but at this point it appears that the Azov defenders do not really listen to historical precedents. They really just defend however they want to, and it looks like they're doing a little bit better than what has been historically expected. So I'm not going to put a date when this Azovstal could fall. I'm not really sure if it ever will fall at this point. So, with that in mind, I guess you could say that's a little bit of a high note to end Mariupol on for the first time in a long while. We're now going to move further down the front, and actually north in a way, towards the area where the 503rd has been. And we can see that the 503rd has been using drones to drop bomblets on Russian vehicles. Hopefully it doesn't have copyrighted music. Let me check. It does. So let me play this video. You can see the infrared camera on this drone as it's flying towards the Russian units. And we can now see the drone fly over a building. It then drops a bomblet on this building, which then promptly explodes. We can now see the drone drop a second bomblet nearer to the first one, and it appears that it exploded around the other side of the building. The first bomblet hit around right here where my mouse cursor was. The second bomblet has now hit on the other side. So actually a pretty decent spread in terms of inflicting damage on both corners of that building. We can now see a bomblet directly dropped onto the hood of a Euro 4320, which of course knocked it out. We can now see another APC. It appeared to be some kind of BTR series vehicle that has now been destroyed by a bomblet as well. Another bomblet was dropped in the same corner of that building. And now we can see a second bomblet dropped in a very similar fashion to the first. Actually, wait a minute, I think this is actually replay. I was sitting there thinking, I was like, wow, this is eerily similar to what happened in the first part of the video. And that's because it's literally the video replaying itself, apparently. But we can once again see all the bomblets drop in the same succession that they were at in the beginning of the video, destroying the same series of vehicles, equipment, and personnel. Of course, wonderful to know that the Ukrainians are managing to use drones to an incredibly effective degree. And with that, we're now going to move on to the next bit of news from this area, where we can see that an Azov battalion on the southern front, but not in Mariupol, was actually getting shelled in the Dnipro Oblast today. So I'm going to let y'all see this video. It's very interesting, and it is actually very unheard of, and something that's not really mentioned a lot is that there's not just one Azov battalion. There's actually several of them, and they're in different areas around the country. There was an Azov battalion, in a way, that was in the Chernihiv area during the opening parts of the war, and now we can see that one of these Azov battalions that's not in Mariupol has now made it to the southern front in the Dnipro Oblast. So with that, here's the video.
Нам приветики передать. Хочу навалить нахуй.
блядь, дверей туда подальше. А с кулачки отлетают, блядь, тоже. Ебать его в рот.
So you can hear that that shelling was incredibly close. It was rattling the concrete, and I know it was probably... what's really weird is that when explosions occur around you, although I've had very few of them, I have been around enough to know, it's really weird because it feels like the area around your nose, it becomes entirely detached from the rest of your face, and is kind of just shaking on its own. It's a really weird feeling. I guess you could say it's like a nasally feeling. I don't really know how to explain it, but it's very weird. So I'm sure that an artillery barrage like that, although I haven't been around one of that type, probably feels the same way, you know, at least to the senses. So with that, we're now going to move on. And if you're wondering where I've gotten that feeling from before, I have stood near cannons when they were firing a while ago. Of course, not firing live rounds. Never been around one doing that, although I wish I was. But the absolute rocking and shaking of the entire area when a cannon fires in a reenactment is just incredible. It's an experience you have to be up close to see, and I highly recommend you go to a reenacting event where they do fire a cannon and at least stand around one when it is fired, because it's a very interesting experience. With that, we're now going to move further down the front, and we're now going to move towards the area around Zaporizhia, or directly south of it, where today we've seen a video sent in by none other than Operator Starsky himself. I got this video from him, and this is a video of a BMP-3 versus a Javelin. So I found this pretty neat. I actually went through the effort of getting this thing on my video editor, and so I have to mute it, sadly, because it does have copyrighted music. But here we can see a BMP-3 in a tree line. It has some kind of green tarp on top of it, and now we can see it being scoped out by the Ukrainian forces in the distance. Now we can see the Ukrainians firing the Javelin at the BMP-3, and it looks like the BMP-3 was, of course, no match for the Javelin anti-tank guided missile, as the Javelin exploded directly atop the BMP-3 and destroyed it immediately. And we're just waiting. There we go. Finally, the Javelin ATGM hits and destroys the BMP in one shot. The Javelin ATGM has pretty much destroyed everything it's come up against. I did get a decent amount of flack, actually, for dissing the Carl Gustav. Apparently, there's a lot of Carl Gustav fans out there, and I actually found out that there's a large amount of modifications and upgrades made to the Carl Gustav that has made it much more potent than its original version that was produced in 1948. So that was something interesting to note, and once again, very interesting to see on film, and I do thank Operator Starsky so much for sharing this video with me. And so with that, we're now going to move further down the front towards the area of Mykolaiv. And today we've gotten some information that is now leading me to believe that the front lines will have to be changed in this area, because we're finally getting a decent amount of video evidence from this area showing that there have been Russian forces more north of Kherson towards the area of Kryvyi Rih. And in this video today, we've seen that the 14th Mechanized has wiped out a Russian base in this area that's supposedly been controlled / not really controlled as far as it's been on my map, because I haven't had enough video evidence. Of course, I have to mute it because it has copyrighted music in it, but we can see that this base is being hit. There is something on fire down there that's emanating a thick black smoke. We can now see what may be smoke shells being fired from something inside of the base. We can now see another explosion rock the base. This one, much larger than the last, it seems. I'm not really sure what it hit, but we can see that in similar fashion to one of the last videos we saw of a Russian supply depot, all the vehicles have now been dug into large foxholes, I guess you could say, large enough to fit a vehicle in. And so we can now see one of these bases being hit once more, and hopefully massive amounts of damage are being inflicted by the Ukrainian strikes on these bases that will make the Russian logistics inoperable or nearly inoperable within this area, which will, of course, help the Ukrainians push them back in a counterattack. We're now going to move into the area of Crimea, where today we've also seen Ukrainian saboteurs in operation in Crimea. But today, they're not sabotaging Russian military operations. They are sabotaging the minds of Russians and pro-Russians themselves, as they've now put little cards inside of these buildings that have a very interesting message on them. To summarize what this says, it pretty much says, "We are here, we are coming for y'all, and there's nothing you can do." That's pretty much what it says in summary. Of course, I hope that someone in the live chat gets a more adept description of the translation on this little card.
Муж принимает участие в спецоперації на Україні, Господи, Боже, мені ж.
But I think that the Russians in that area and the pro-Russians are getting a little bit scared, because that's a little ominous, and hopefully they will be scared, because really the truth is that Ukrainian civilians have been scared for their lives for a good while, and I think putting a little postcard down inside of a building, it's not too bad. So with that, we're now going to move beyond Ukraine, I believe, because that is all the news within the country. Yes, I'm correct. We're now going to move into Germany, where we've seen that some Ukrainian soldiers have actually made it outside of the country, and they're not just on vacation. They are learning how to use the Panzerhaubitze 2000 SPG system, which will be provided by the Germans incredibly soon. Ukraine will receive 13 of these SPGs. Of course, I have to mute it, but you can see here in this video, Panzerhaubitze 2000s in a training field. We can now see a demonstration of how the Panzerhaubitze system works. Of course, it's explaining that it can fire multiple shots before the first one even lands, and so all of the shells that were fired, according to this illustration, 5 of them will all hit the target at the exact same time. Of course, an incredible attribute to the Panzerhaubitze system, considering that it has an impressive rate of fire for a self-propelled gun. And so with that, that's the end of the video. Hopefully, the Ukrainians will be able to use these to great effect, much like they've been now using the M777 for about a week to deadly effect against the Russians. Hopefully, the Panzerhaubitze will have the same fate as the M777. With that, we're now going to move on to some news that isn't exactly Ukrainian news, but is very important news that's been pertaining to the Ukrainian situation. The British have now stepped up to their World War II role. They have now guaranteed the independence of Finland and have signed a defensive pact with them. If Finland was to be attacked tomorrow, the British now have a binding agreement with the Finnish that they will protect their sovereignty through force of arms. This is a major step forward in Western relations with Finland, considering that Finland has been a largely neutral country for all of modern history. And now we can see that the British are actually facilitating their entry into NATO and ensuring that a Russian attack will most likely not occur on Finland. Otherwise, it will incur the wrath of the British. And as far as we know, although the British army is smaller in size compared to the Russian army, that doesn't mean squat, because their equipment is better, they are higher funded, and they will probably end up besting the Russians even on their own. So with that, of course, that is incredibly interesting news, and something that tells me that Finland is going to have a very bright and peaceful future for the most part. So good job to Britain. I'm very proud that their government stepped forward and did such a wonderful thing to ensure the safekeeping of peace in Europe as a whole. And so with that, we have reached the end of tonight's news. But before we go, everyone don't leave just yet. I'm going to try and find us a speech from President Zelensky. President Zelensky address. Let's see if we've got one from today. 1 month ago, March 8th. Official website of the President of Ukraine. This looks like a very good place to go. This is 22 minutes long. I believe he usually puts out a shorter one, and I want to find the shorter one for y'all.
And Enforcer, I saw a comment a moment ago saying that one of our viewers have posted it in the Discord.
Ah, got you. Could you share that with me over our Discord call real quick, so that way I can hop onto it?
Yeah, let me see if I can spot it real quick.
Got you. Everyone just stand by real quick. We're going to find that speech from the president today, and then we're going to play it. And once that speech is over, we will go into the question segment. So everyone give us just a second. Please be patient. We are trying to find the speech right now. Let me know when you have that up, Matthew.
All right, just a moment. Let's see here. I am not seeing it. I'm not sure if I'm missing it, but I don't see it in the Discord.
Well, I guess unfortunately we will have to go without the speech for today, but we will make sure to include that speech tomorrow if we can find it. So once again, that is the end of tonight's news. If you did enjoy this news and you are new to this channel, which it appears that we had an incredibly large audience tonight, please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, as these streams do come on every single day of the week at 10 p.m. Eastern Time, except for Mondays. So once again, thank you all for watching the news, and we're now going to go into the question segment. If you did throw down a question in the live chat with an @Enforcer or @Enforcer Matt tag on it, your question may be answered before the end of the night. If you did throw down a super chat, your question will be answered regardless. We answer all of our super chats because that's the only way we keep this channel running, and I do want to thank y'all so much for helping me to continue doing what I do. So with that, we're going to move on to the questions. So what do we got, Matthew?
All right, and first up, we have a $50 donation from Anthony Dobson, who says, in terms of combat capabilities, which is the finer fighting force, the Polenta Patrol or the Grit Guards? Loved the food chat yesterday. You should market Enforcer-branded MREs.
Well, thank you very much for the support. I'm going to be honest. I'm not a big fan of MREs, and I know that's a huge thing for a lot of people, but let me tell you this. I have known enough veterans to tell you none of them like MREs either. I don't know a soul from the Army or the Marine, or well, any branch of the military here in the United States that actually enjoyed an MRE. And if they did, I have never met them. So, to be honest, I don't know if I may do MREs, but something I would like to do if I was to do anything is like an Enforcer steak, if you know what I mean, because that is something that someone in the military will really want. A high morale kind of food, of course, has to have a large logistical structure surrounding it to actually get it to the front lines fresh and ready to eat, but it's still worth it because that makes all the difference in a war. So I thank you very much for the support, and I do like your little joke about the food chat yesterday because that went way off the rails, but it was still a very fun chat to have. So thank you once again for the support. I hope that does address the question in the comment in a way. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $25 donation from Praise Adonai, who says, just to let you know, I am Viking. Did you know that the Vikes took the Donbass in the 10th century? The only people to repel the Vikings were the Welsh. They stalemated. Maybe Ukrainians are Viking descendants. Ukrainians fight like the Vikings.
Yes, the Ukrainians are actually Viking descendants for a pretty good bit. The Vikings actually had a very large role to play in most of European history, surprisingly, which is something I believe some people don't really know, is that Vikings, while they were the marauding seafaring people that they were, who hailed from hailed from Norway. I was about to say what I was about to say here in a minute, and they actually were supposedly the first group of Europeans to arrive in the Americas for a very short while with Leif Erikson. They actually had a very large history of pretty much nation building across all of Europe. For example, the British monarchy can pretty much trace its roots back to the Normans of northern France, who were pretty much Vikings in a way, that were given that land by the French crown because of some prior dealings in between the French and the Vikings, which is a very interesting history. Actually, something very, very cool is that one of my ancestors, which I will not give his name because then that will let y'all trace who I am because it's a very, very rare last name. But one of my ancestors was actually the first one in our family was actually a king of North Wales who actually fought against the Vikings a little bit and then was actually the well, I won't give that much information because then that will narrow down who it is. But anyways, he was a king of North Wales. Incredibly cool story, and I am very proud of my family's heritage because we're actually 90% British, and the rest of our, like genetics is all Swedish. So it was very interesting to me. I was like, wow, I'm 90% British. I'm more British than some British people. But I do thank you very much for the support, and that is very interesting to hear, Praise Adonai. So thank you once again for the support. And yes, I do believe that the Ukrainians have a decent amount of Viking influence on them, at least historically. So I thank you very much for the support, and with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $20 donation from Bass Girl, who says, Enforcer, since the USA is sending Mi-17 helicopters, why can't they send airplanes too? Thank you, General Leafspring and Colonel Leafspring. I appreciate you and Matt. You guys are awesome. And how's Matt's raise going? And to answer that last part of the question there, the raise is going good. But I did just buy a new MacBook, so there we go. Kind of went out the window.
he kind of had a step up, and then he had a step down. Now he's back to begging on the corner of a street. So to answer that question, the U.S. is sending Mi-17 helicopters. That is correct. I don't really know where they got them from. I haven't really looked into that story all too much, but somehow we have some. Why can't they send airplanes too? I believe that it has been in the talks that they are going to send some kind of a F-16 model or F-15. I'm not really sure what variant of it. There are a million variants of the F-16 and F-15. There's the F-16A, the F-16C, the F-16 Block 50, the Block 51, the Block 51C. I mean, there's a million of them. And if I went through every single variant of the F-16, we would be here for the rest of the night just me listing them off. It would be like that. It would be like that bit in Forrest Gump where like Bubba was talking about, like, there's shrimp grits and, you know, like shrimp bacon and all that stuff. It would be like that. So unfortunately, I can't go through which one it would be, but I have heard that it is seriously being considered that there will be aircraft sent over by the United States eventually that may be of American design. So I hope that does answer the question, but then again, that's entirely on the table, and that's just the information we've heard, and none of that's really been confirmed, although that's the general assumption of what will be sent over in the Lend-Lease, which was just approved a day or two ago. So I hope that does answer the question. And I do believe that American aircraft, may be within Ukraine's future soon. So thank you once again for the support, Bass Girl. You've been around for an incredibly long while, and I do thank you very much for the support. Hope that answers the question once again. And with that, we're going to move on to the next one.
And next up, we have a $15 donation from Zyper Sniper 1, who says, Russia does not have an army. I only see terrorists wearing Russian uniforms.
I have to agree, and it looks like they're also not just terrorists, but it also looks like they're Black Friday shoppers, because they are trying to get as much stuff as possible from Ukraine, like washing machines and stuff, like insane stuff that you would never think someone would actually try and steal, yet they're trying to steal it anyway. So I'd have to agree, they're not only terrorists, but it looks like they're Black Friday shoppers. And so with that, I thank you very much for the support. And I also said Brack Friday. That's a new thing. We're going to be starting Brack Friday here on the Enforcer channel. I'm just playing, of course, but I do thank you very much for the support, and I can entirely agree with that assessment. So with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next, we have another $15 donation from Zyper Sniper again, who says, the guy with the eyepiece in Mariupol looks like the modern-day Adrian Carton de Wiart, the unkillable soldier.
Could you spell how that was typed in for me, Matthew, real quick?
Yes, and I'm actually going to put that in the chat.
Got you. I'm waiting. All right. Waiting for it. There we go. Carton de Wiart. So he was a British Army officer. How did I not know about this man? Wow. I'm a huge fan of British military history, and sadly, I knew nothing about this man. I have seen his picture before, but I didn't actually know that that was his name, and that is one hell of a name. And so, yes, he actually looks a lot like that. Has the same kind of expression, even in this picture here. So yes, I could entirely agree with that, and I like that you are a avid historian of British history and that you did know this guy in particular. So thank you so much for the support, and I do thank you very much for making the comparison. I would have to agree that soldier, excuse me, I just coughed on my spit there, but that soldier in the Azovstal is much like this man here. So I thank you very much once again for the support, and with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $10 donation from Robbie Dog, who says, is it true that YouTube still takes 30% of our support? If yes, how can I support you so you can get 100%? Also, if you call your merchandise souvenirs, it would sound much better. Enjoy my $7 support.
Well, I thank you very much for the support. I don't really know about the merchandise souvenir thing. We'll look into that. But to answer that question, yes, YouTube does take 30% of all the super chats, which I'm fine with. You know, like YouTube is the platform I'm on, and so, you know, of course you have to pay dues to them in a way for being able to be on here and pretty much being promoted by their algorithm, so I don't really complain about that all too much. We actually don't have a way to support the channel beyond the super chats. And that's something, well, actually the merchandise. You know, the merchandise is the only other thing, but we don't really push the merchandise a lot, and we only push it when we do limited edition runs. By the way, it is nice stuff. If you haven't gotten any, go over there and check it out. You might find something interesting, and if you would like to support the channel and get something cool out of it, that's a very good way to do it. And also, it's pretty decent quality as well. But to answer the other part of that question, there is no other way to support this channel than the super chat. So that's why I'm always very appreciative of super chats, because this is the only way we continue to run, pretty much, is through them. So if you do enjoy the channel and you would like to see us continue, you know, kind of like Wikipedia, make sure to throw in a little bit of support because it does help us to keep running. So once again, I thank you so much for the support. I hope that does answer that question. And with that, we're going to move on to the next one.
And next up, we have a $10 donation from Total War Guy, who says, Copperhead, that the M777 can shoot, has been replaced because the laser-guided round can kill the same person calling for support if incorrectly used.
Very interesting. I did not know that, but that is an interesting bit of info to consider. But I do thank you very much for the support. I didn't actually know that, and I hope that actually helped out a lot of the audience with learning how laser-guided munitions can be a little bit dangerous to use if used improperly. Once again, that's kind of how everything works in the world. You know, as long as it's being used properly and operated safely, it is, of course, a wonderful system to use. But if you don't have the proper training, and it can, of course, be dangerous. So I do thank you very much once again for sharing that. And I just saw a question real quick I'm going to answer from the live chat, Matthew, from Leslie Evans. They said, at the Enforcer, do you think Mr. Lunchtime and Starsky are going to meet in the battlefield and heroically fight like Hector and Achilles in the movie? I don't really know about Hector and Achilles, if that's the correct way to pronounce that name. And I don't think I don't think Operator Starsky would want to fight Mr. Lunchtime, because Mr. Lunchtime pretty much has a gravitational force surrounding him. And so it's not actually him revolving around the war. The war is revolving around him. And so if Operator Starsky got close enough to Mr. Lunchtime, I feel like Mr. Lunchtime's gravitational force would be much like a black hole, and Operator Starsky would end up being scrunched. So we want to keep Starsky as far away from Mr. Lunchtime as possible, and it could just be that that Mr. Lunchtime eats him. So I don't want any of that to happen to Operator Starsky. Him and me are pretty good pals. Of course, he did help us out a lot with the Sunday fundraiser, and I do admire his work of traveling around and reporting the news from the front in Ukraine. So I hope that answers the question, and with that, we're going to move on to the next one.
All right, and next up we have a $10 donation from Zero J Kwan, who says, Enforcer, I had a friend from Ukraine translate to me the red paint video to embassy is actually the Russian embassy in Poland. Keep up the good work, and Slava Ukraine.
Well, I thank you very much for the support, and I think you may be right. When I saw that caption, I was like, that's very weird that it's the Polish embassy in Moscow. So let's take a look at that again. So that looks like a Polish license plate. I think you may be correct, but let me check. Russian license plate. This is a Russian license plate. Well, what the hell's up with that? That's not a license plate. Anyways, that's a Russian license plate. Let's pull up a Polish license plate, which will probably be like the rest of the European Union license plates. So this is, and there it is again, what is up with that? But anyways, this is a Polish license plate. So if we look at this license plate, it has the Russian format on it. So I do actually believe, based off of that, that this is certainly Russians throwing paint on the Polish embassy in Moscow. That would seem to make a lot more sense, because that is in fact a Russian car. So I'm going off of that, and just based off of that alone, I would have to say I'm going to have to stick by this was most likely in Moscow against the Polish embassy. And that also does not look like the Russian eagle. That it looks like the Polish eagle. Let's pull that up real quick. Let's actually just pull up the Polish embassy in Moscow. Polish embassy, Moscow. Images. See? That's the exact same guard shack that's in here. And so, yes, this is actually the Polish embassy in Moscow. So, unfortunately, I believe your friend was correct, but I did have to get to the bottom of that to make sure that I wasn't reporting misinformation. But it does appear that this was the Polish embassy in Moscow, because the license plate as well as the guard shack line up with the Polish embassy in Moscow. But I do thank you very much for the support, and I hope that does address the question in a way. And with that, we're going to move on to the next one.
And let's see here, just a moment. Enforcer Google Sheets is having a bit of a glitch. Okay, so next up we have a $10 donation from Rated PG, who says, Enforcer, August 24th is Ukraine Independence Day. I'm hoping Ukraine wins before or on that day. Have a coffee on me.
Well, thank you very much for the support, and I am glad to know that everyone is now going to hop back on the coffee fund now that Speed Break is back. So it looks like my caffeine fix will be satiated for the near future. Of course, it'll be lasting for about an hour. But anyways, to answer that question, answer the comment. I do hope that the victory is won before Ukrainian Independence Day. And let's pull that up one more time. Ukrainian, oh, misspelled it. Ukrainian Independence Day. It's August 24th. And I think that would be a pretty reasonable timetable for Ukraine to win this war by. So I'll have to agree. I think it is possible, and hopefully Ukraine will win this war before August of this year. So I thank you very much for the support once again. I hope that does address the comment, because I do agree that I hope that the Ukrainians win before their Independence Day, so that way they can celebrate Independence Day like it's the 4th of July, if you get the joke. And with that, I thank you so much for the support once again, and we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have another question from Zyper Sniper 1, who puts in another $15 donation and says, the band Sabaton made a song about Adrian Carton de Viart called The Unkillable Soldier. It's recommended. Great work as always, and keep it up.
Well, I thank you very much for the support, Zyper Sniper. Sadly, I don't listen to Sabaton a lot. I listen to a few of their songs. Of course, everyone's heard Prima Victoria, but I haven't really heard any of their other songs. I'm actually... Like, if you hear the music that's playing at the intro of this video when the countdown's happening, that's actually the music I listen to, like, seriously. So, I don't really listen to a lot of modern music, to be honest with you. And that kind of rolls into, again, the whole thing with, like, the actors and stuff, and everyone's like, what, are you living under a rock? I mean, like, kind of, yeah. I mean, like, I just don't really follow, modern trends, it's kind of weird, yeah, but I guess that's just me. So I thank you very much for the support. I will take a look at it though, since you recommended it, but I haven't never actually heard of it myself up until now. So thank you once again, and with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $10 donation from Bob A, who says the red paint job is probably in retaliation for dousing the Russian foreign minister to Poland with red paint on the 9th.
Yeah, that would actually be a very reasonable explanation of why they threw red paint at the Polish embassy, because that did happen to the Russian ambassador to Poland, I believe, just a few days ago. He had red paint thrown on him, and I have to say he deserved it. And so I think that maybe what was happening in Moscow was that was retaliation for the red paint being thrown on their ambassador. Also, another thing, real quick. Yes, I was just looking at Cat J and W's chat in the live chat, because I want to try and address a few of those as we go by, and we just did hear about that, and I did see it. So with that, we're thank you once again for the support and bringing that up. That's a very good explanation why. And with that, we're now going to move on to the next question.
And up next, we have another $16 donation from Rafael Harris, who says, Enforcer, thanks for leading the Leaf Spring Army and doing so much good every single Sunday. Have you heard the music of Golem? Golem has songs called Odessa and Train Across Ukraine.
Unfortunately, I have not heard about that. A lot of people are apparently going to start asking about pop music to figure out, well, not pop music, modern music, to find out where my threshold for modern music is. But I really don't have one, because I just don't listen to modern music. It's not that I find it to be trash or anything, it's not that. It's just that for some reason, I just don't really have too much of a liking for it. I mean, like, it's music, sure, it's okay, and people of course listen to it and love it, but for some reason it just doesn't really jive with me. So I will take a look at that band though. I've been getting a lot of recommendations from modern music that's been about the Ukrainian war. I will take a look at it and listen to it, but I have not heard about that band until now. So thank you once again for the support, and with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next, we have a visit from the Funker team. We have a $10 donation from Josh Brooks, who says, Josh from Funker here. Great show, guys. Ronnie turned me onto the channel, and it's super impressive what you guys are doing, so keep it up.
Well, I thank you very much for the support. Of course, I talked to Ronnie a lot after last night's stream, and we did have some very interesting talks, and it actually seemed like a misunderstood a lot about what the Funker 530 channel was about. So it was good to get some of those misunderstandings cleared up. And actually, Ronnie was a very nice guy. I was very impressed with how nice he was. And there have been some talks about maybe bringing them on for a Sunday night fundraiser, but we are still looking into that and trying to figure out the scheduling and stuff. So with that, I do thank you very much for the support again. It is cool to hear from the Funker 530 team and know that we have a lot of people from y'all's team watching. And with that, we're going to move on to the next video. I mean, the next question.
All right. And next up, we have a $10 donation from JK, who says, may the orcs be disposed of with speed of in-law.
I do agree. I hope that they are. We can see from the large part, and the Kharkiv area at least, it seems like it's starting to head in that direction. It may become a whole northern front kind of thing west of the Donetsk River, but we are, of course, waiting to see if that will become the trend. So I thank you very much for the support, and I can agree that hopefully they are expelled with the speed of an in-law. So with that, I thank you very much for the support once again, and we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next, we have a $10 donation from James W., who says, Enforcer, could you discuss Lidmila Pavlichenko? She's a famous female Ukrainian sniper and a popular archetype for a fierce woman soldier. See History on Fire podcast for excellent bio on her.
Now, I would love to give a personal recount of her story, but unfortunately, I don't know it. And I also don't know the personal stories of the commander, the co-commander of the Azov as well. So it's not really like a singling out thing. In general, I don't really focus on personal stories in the war. Wars are generally about large pictures, and so sadly, I never really get to look into the deep down stories of these folks who are amazing people that are fighting an unbelievable war these days. And so sadly, I haven't been able to, really look at her story. But based off of how she was acting in the Azovstal, I think her story was pretty much told for her. She is an incredible soldier, much like the rest of the Ukrainian people who are fighting for their country. And of course, I have a lot of admiration for every single one of them. So I do thank you very much for the support. And I hope that does answer the question in a way. I'm sorry that I couldn't really give a lot of information about her background or her story, but I will look into it and try and get some information and stories about each and every one of those major defenders in the Azovstal. So with that, I thank you so much once again, and with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $10 donation from Big Tex, who says, former Navy guy here, and I can tell you that we loved it in the Gulf War when Marines would come on board the aircraft carriers with MREs. They liked the shipboard mess, but we liked their MREs because of the novelty.
Well, yes, I can agree that when an MRE is something you're not eating a lot, it's really cool. I mean, like, the MREs are cool just because it's like, wow, look, it's like pre-packed food, ready to go. It stores forever. Well, not forever, but for a decent while. And, well, a decent while is sometimes in decades, but, it's neat to have every once in a while. But if you're out in the field and you're eating that for 60 days straight, even if you get a variety of these things, they just become slush, and you would rather eat anything rather than an MRE. And that's been backed up by historical evidence and studies done in World War I, where soldiers were given earlier prepared cold food versus warm food. And this test was done in the winter, and it was done to see, and this was done in the United States Army, by the way, the American Expeditionary Force of 1917 and 18, and they did it to see, does PTS, well, at the time they called it shell shock, does shell shock rates increase based off of the quality of the food they're receiving? And they actually found out, and it was shocking, that the quality of the food has almost everything to do with PTSD, well, shell shock rates at that time. And so if they got cold food consistently, the shell shock rates went up through the roof. And if they got warm food, their shell shock rates went down. And so while it's a neat novelty to eat the MRE, sure, once you have like good prepared food all the time, like you do on board a ship, it is cool to get one of those things. But if you're eating those constantly, they get old. I mean, like, they really do. Matthew and me once had MREs, and we tried eating them for a bit, and we wore out of them over a very short amount of time. And so I would have to say that I'm not a big fan of them. And we didn't get the military MREs. They were like the camping MRE kind of things. You know what I'm talking about? But we didn't like them. We were like, ew, these things get tiresome fast. So I do know what you're saying. But at the same time, quality food makes a huge difference. And while it is neat to get something like that, I think it's more important to get good, hot, delicious food to the soldiers instead of like an MRE, you know, all the time. But I do thank you very much for the support. I do know where you're coming from. They are cool to have every once in a while. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $50 donation from Sharon Tukolsky Miller, who does not leave a comment.
Well, I thank you very much for the support. Of course, the support's wonderful. I thank you so much for it. I just wish you had a question that I can answer for you so that way I could show my appreciation for you helping me to continue going. But I do thank you so much for the support once again. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $10 donation from The Big Cheese, who says, beef stew is my favorite MRE, but there are a few that I like. Not all of us dislike MREs.
That's true. There are some people out there who do not dislike MREs, but at the same time, I mean, like, if you had the choice, man, in between a nice tender steak, medium to medium rare, medium well done, heading into questionable territory, but medium to medium rare, with a side of mashed potatoes and peas, would you take that over an MRE? I have a feeling that your answer would be yes, because no one would turn down a steak dinner like that for an MRE, and I know it. And so that's kind of my point, is that if you can get good food like that to the soldiers, I think that should be the priority. And if you can also get a whole bunch of creature comforts and just, you know, really just nice treats like ice cream and stuff like that up there, that of course always boosts morale as well. And so my focus is always on logistics, and you always want to make sure that your whole entire logistical chain is set up where you can get those kinds of creature comforts up there. Not all the time, but sometimes, at least. So I thank you very much for the support. I do know that there are people out there who do enjoy MREs, and it's good to know that you have a specific one that is your go-to favorite. That's really cool, and I do thank you so much for the support. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $20 donation from Tanjan Bragiri, who says, Slava Ukraine Vikings.
Slava Ukraini, I think that's correct. Vikings. Also, another thing interesting is that the guy brought up the Welsh again, and a lot of people were talking about the Welsh in general, and that was really crazy to me. And a lot of y'all may not know what the Welsh flag looks like, and although this is not Ukrainian, this is the Welsh flag. It's an incredibly cool flag. Actually, the Welsh say that Wales was the land of dragons, and they say that the last one was killed in the very early medieval ages. Of course, there's no evidence for that, but it's still a very interesting little story, and that's why the dragon is on the Welsh flag. Very cool flag, very unique one, just because of the dragon alone. And I'm actually, of course, a huge fan of Welsh culture and history, because it's just a very interesting Celtic culture on the British Isles that still exists in a way, and it's been having a resurgence in recent decades. But with that, I do thank you very much for the support and bringing up the Vikings thing again, and with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $10 super chat from WL. And thank you very much for your support of the channel. It's very much appreciated. And up next, we have a $10 donation from somebody who did not put in their username and apparently want to remain anonymous, who says Coffee Fund.
Well, I thank you so much for the support, anonymous user, for the coffee fund. I'm, of course, very appreciative of it. And, you know, it also helps us to go that much further in keeping energetic enough to keep these streams running. So thank you once again. And also, I just saw someone in the live chat, because I want to touch on the live chats a little bit so that way people don't think we're ignoring y'all. We're not. I actually look at them. Someone said, and let me check real quick. I want to find it again. Mr. Chancho48 said, was your family British loyalist during the Revolutionary War? No, we weren't. My family actually has a really interesting story. One of our ancestors, and this is crazy cool, was actually part of the McKay's Rangers, and somehow through the years, the last name changed from McKay to McCoy, like the McCoy Hatfields. And so I don't really care about this. There's a million McCoys out there, and that's not my last name. But still, what was really interesting is that I actually joined a reenacting group that did the McKay's Rangers as a reenacting, gig. And what was crazy is that when I joined it, I had no idea that one of my ancestors, pretty much, had been a member of the McKay's Rangers in the 1730s when Governor Oglethorpe hired them. And just for y'all to know, the McKay's Rangers was a Scottish mercenary group hired by the Georgia colony to defend the frontier borders of that area. So it was very interesting. They also participated in the War of Jenkins Ear, which is a really crazy war that happened in early American history. So I would highly suggest y'all check that out, but it was a very cool story nonetheless. So that kind of answers the question of my early American family history. And also there was a family member of ours way back in the day that was actually a member of the Swamp Rats, which is what the movie Patriot is based off of. So I hope that answers the question in a way. No, they weren't, but I do thank you very much for the support. And well, not the support. I thank you very much for asking that, because it's a funny little story for me to tell. So with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have Dick Cheney. Will Riley puts in a $10 donation and says, Dick Cheney likes the theme song from Glory. Surely you've heard that. It's right up your alley. MREs are super high calorie and bind you up like a block of government cheese.
Well, I thank you very much for the support, and I'm glad you do agree that the MREs will get you constipated. That's the one thing I hear the most. I don't know what's in the MREs that make them do that to people, but it seems like that's a reoccurring thing. And also, apparently it turns your stuff green. You know, like, if you know what I'm saying. If you were in the service, you've heard the stories. I haven't been in the service, but I've heard the stories enough to know that that is definitely a scientific fact that it does that to you. Also, to answer the first part of that question about the theme song to the movie Glory, yes, I have seen the movie Glory. That was actually mandatory watching in one of my classes in high school. I was actually in a class that you had to watch that movie every year in. So, yes, I did watch that. It was a very good movie. I loved the soundtrack to it, and the cast was incredibly well done for that movie. I liked it a lot. It was a very good Civil War movie. And so with that, I do thank you very much for the support. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next, we have a $9 donation from Simon Gardner, who says, Enforcer, surely the Ukrainians can drop in medical supplies into Azov troops in the Azovstal with a drone with a 48-kilogram payload. The closest Ukrainian forces are only 60 miles from Mariupol.
Now, that sounds like it's not far, only 60 miles, because we're thinking about it in like a driving context. They're probably just getting on the interstate and driving 60 miles. But 60 miles in military terms, especially in a war that's moving this slowly at this point with front lines hardly moving at all, 60 miles is monolithic to cover. And so while it may just be only 60 miles, you have to remember Belgorod is 30 miles away from the Ukrainian border, and that looks like it's a long distance. Like, check this out. Let me make sure. It's actually only 20 miles, and that still looks like a long distance. And so when you're saying that they're 60 miles away from Mariupol, that is 3 times the distance that Belgorod is from the Russian border. So that is a huge distance to cover, and considering that it was massive for the Ukrainians to reach Stary Saltiv traveling around 10 miles a day from Kharkiv, you can get the idea that it would be a really big feat for them to push all the way down there to Mariupol, or to have a drone cover that amount of airspace to get to Mariupol and then drop off medical supplies. On top of that, the question still stands, do they have qualified or well-trained physicians inside of Mariupol that could actually tend to the wounds and ailments that a lot of these Azov defenders have now found themselves faced with? And I think the answer to that is most likely no, or they have such a small amount of them that it wouldn't be an efficient way to take care of those wounded. But still, I do know what you're saying. Something is better than nothing, and I do hope that they look into a solution to all these wounded soldiers who are getting infections and stuff in Mariupol at this point. So I do thank you very much for the support. I hope that does answer the question. And with that, we're going to move on to the next one.
And up next, we have an $8 super chat from R.M. Crosby, who says, thank you, and buy yourself something old.
R.M. Crosby. Matthew, does that sound familiar?
The first initials don't match up.
Okay, I was just making sure. But I do thank you very much for the support. We actually knew someone with that last name before, but thank you once again. And I will make sure to buy myself something old. Something old. But I do thank you very much for the support. I will look into that. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next, we have an $8 super chat from Joel Rendu. Hopefully I'm saying that properly. They say, how do you think Russia declaring general mobilization would actually help them if their main goal or main troops and equipment aren't cutting it? More meat for the meat grinder, ?
Well, mobilization really wouldn't do much for them at all, because if they had a call to mobilization, they would of course have to start mobilizing new units that the Russians really don't have. They would have to, like we saw on Russian TV, which the commentator brought up some very good points. If they wanted to mobilize new ships, it would take 2 years until the first one even left the dry dock. If they wanted to mobilize a new tank regiment, 90 days minimum. New aviation regiment, end of the year from right now. And so you can get the idea that while a mobilization sounds great on paper, it takes a long time to get the industrial engine churning and also the military churning to actually pump out these units. It takes time. It's not something instant. And so you can get the general picture that a mobilization wouldn't really mean anything in the short-term picture. In the long term, it would. Of course, more units would eventually arrive to the front lines. Maybe the logistics situation would improve for the Russians at that point. I'm not really sure. I don't think it would, considering that they haven't learned to fix the situation yet. But still, a general mobilization isn't going to be like the immediate war-changing thing that everyone's kind of making it out to be, because a mobilization takes a long time to come into effect. In World War One, I know I reference World War One a lot, but it does have a lot of normal archetype kind of things that happen in a war. The United States declared war on Germany and also Austria-Hungary in 1917. The problem is that at the time, the United States really didn't have a standing military, and so they had to mobilize the entire thing from the ground up. And the U.S. government found out immediately after they declared war. They're like, oh, we actually can't mobilize units. It's going to take us like 19 months to mobilize the forces ourselves and actually produce the equipment and then send them over. And as you know, after the United States declared war on Germany, the war ended in 11 months. So if we'd actually sat over here and waited for ourselves to produce the equipment and then mobilize the units ourselves, the United States would have never entered the war. The war would have ended, most likely before the first American soldiers would have actually arrived over there. And so what happened to the United States in World War I? We actually sent the soldiers over largely without equipment, and then the French and the British loaned the equipment to the American units. And so you'd see American forces using like Vickers, heavy machine guns. Later on, those were called medium machine guns, but at the time they were heavy machine guns. And you would see them using a whole bunch of British stuff. Like, for example, British gas masks. I forgot the exact name for them. I have one. That's the profile picture I've got. But a lot of the stuff was given to us by the British. And also with the French, you could see a large amount of French equipment making its way into American units at the time as well. And so pretty much what I'm trying to say by that is that in that example, if the United States was in Russia's position and it had no external support, and it was in the World War I situation again, kind of like how Russia is finding itself in, where it's largely underprepared for the task at hand and it actually had to mobilize, it would be so long by the time they mobilized that the war would pretty much be over by the time they actually got new forces to the front. So to answer that question, in brief, mobilization isn't going to mean all too much for now or even in the near future. So I hope that answers the question. I do thank you very much for the support. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next, we have a $20 super chat from See You on YouTube, who says, "Hello again, Enforcer. I enjoyed your video with Operator Starsky. I watch your videos from Operator Starsky regularly."
Well, I thank you very much for the support, and it is good to hear that we have a lot of cross viewers from Operator Starsky's channel over here. A lot of Operator Starsky's fans actually came over here and have now become members of the Leaf Spring Army. And once again, I have to say to all of you, welcome. You are a part of one of the greatest movements I think there is on the, well, not really movements, one of the greatest organizations, I guess you could say, there is on the internet. I've never seen a group of people on YouTube that do so much every single Sunday, and so I'm proud of everyone, honestly. And it is good to hear that we have people who are from Operator Starsky's channel and actually all over the internet. We actually saw just a second ago when I was talking about Funker 530, we have a lot of Funker 530 people here in this chat. They were huge fans of them. And so with that, I thank you very much for the support. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next, we have a $20 super chat from Super Creech, who says, "The Creech rocking it, Enforcer and Enforcer Matt, and thanks for the birthday wishes. Okay, how long you think till the end of course rough guest, Slava Ukraine?"
Could you read that last part again about the course rough guest or something like that?
Yes, just a moment. Let me look here. There appear to be some typos. So they're trying to say, how long until the end of course I'm not really sure what to make of that.
I'm going to try and answer that question the best I can, of course, Super Creech. Let me make sure I said, yeah, Super Creech. Okay, how long you think till the end of course rough guess? I don't know what that means. Super Creech, if you could send in a question, well, an answer to that through the live chat, what that last part means, we'll try and get back to that question and answer it. But unfortunately, right now, I don't think I'll be able to answer that part of the question. But to answer the first part of it, I'm now turning into a New Yorker. I'm going to start talking about point. But the first part of it is the Creech Rocky Get Enforcer Matt, and thanks for the birthday wishes. Well, no problem at all. Of course, I'm very happy to give everyone birthday wishes if you do have a birthday. So just let me know, and I'll of course tell you happy birthday. And you know, that'll just be that. So thank you very much once again for the support. If you could clarify what that last part meant, we will try and answer it. So I thank you once again for the support, and we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $10 super chat from Hoodoo, Texas, who says anything about Azovstal relief or resupply would be a military secret and not something to brag about like a tank brew. Don't assume they are not working the problem if there is a solution.
I do agree that they will, of course, keep that kind of information secret, but at the same time, considering that, oh, I don't know. I mean, like that just may be a good point to just put out there and stand on its own. I don't really think there would be a decent, you know, like devil's advocate argument to that. But I do thank you very much for the support. Of course, that is something important to point out. And so I thank you once again for doing that. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have an $8 donation from Joel Rendu again. Let's see here. And that question's already been answered. Apparently, Google Sheets did not update that. Up next, we have an $8 donation from Ju Santos, who says, do you know who Bolsonaro is, the president of Brazil? What do you think of his visit to Putin before the war?
I do know Bolsonaro. I actually have a friend from Brazil. Everyone's probably thinking I'm Mr. Worldwide because I say I have friends from everywhere. But let me tell you of all the friends I have friends from Brazil. I have friends from Kazakhstan. I have friends from Ukraine. I actually know a German, or two. I'm not really sure if one of them's German. I actually knew a couple of Swedes at a short time, although I've kind of stopped talking to them. Nothing happened with the friendship or anything. It's just that everyone kind of just like started drifting away because, you know, the different time zones, so couldn't really talk to them all too much. I of course have British friends. Huge shout out to my British friends, and a huge shout out to Brad, who's one of them, who's helped set up our Discord server time and time again. And I have to say, I love my British friends. Sadly, I just never really get to play with them much because I don't have a lot of time anymore. But yes, I have a lot of friends around the world, and so I did actually hear about Bolsonaro from my Brazilian friend. I, of course, don't weigh in on politics, so I can't talk about his political positions, and I know that I've generally said I don't talk about American politics, but I also don't talk about foreign countries' politics because that's kind of opening the same can of worms just in a different country. But to talk about his visit to Putin before the war, I'm going to have to plead ignorance on that. I actually didn't know that he had gone to some kind of a meeting with Putin in Russia before the war, and I don't really know what was discussed. So I really can't commentate on it all too much, so I'm going to have to plead ignorance on that one. But I do thank you very much for the support, and I do hope that answers the question. And with that, we're going to move on to the next one.
And up next, we have an $8 donation from Dad Good, who says, with missile failure rates as high as 60%, coupled with corruption, etc., do you think any of the Russian nuclear missiles would actually be able to launch and not just blow up in their silos?
I think that a lot of the Russian missiles would not be able to launch, and that's just because of their lack of budget. They obviously do not have the money to maintain all of these missiles and then also maintain this burgeoning military with 12,000 main battle tanks, 20 to 30,000 APCs, thousands of planes, thousands of helicopters. It's impossible. They just don't have the budget to maintain all that stuff unless if there's like some magical being in Russia that's just magically maintaining all of these vehicles. There's no way they could do all of that. So I don't think a lot of the Russian nuclear weapons would work, and I think the Russian government knows that, and so they rely on the threat of the remaining ones that do work alone. Because once again, while they may have like 100 operational nukes or 1,000 or 3,000, 1,000, well, just 100 nukes being launched is a massive ordeal, and it'll cause a massive amount of casualties and damage worldwide. So I think that a lot of them would actually fail, but, you know, that's kind of my opinion. It's kind of hard to really weigh in on the nuclear thing because one nuclear weapon versus 1,000, everyone's scared of even just one. So I thank you very much for the support. I hope that does answer the question. And with that, we're going to move on to the next one.
And Enforcer, real quick, I think on Super Creech's super chat, I think he was referencing when the end of the war was going to happen.
Oh, okay. Well, I thank you once again for clarifying that. And to answer the question, I think I really don't want to put an end on this war because while I'm very good at estimating and saying what's going to happen within the coming weeks, I'm not really one to go fortune telling because once you go that far into the future, there are so many things that can happen a month from now that could change when this war ends. And so I don't really want to be like the Mr. Know-it-all and say the war is going to end now because I don't really know. I mean, like, so many things could change within a month that this war could go on for maybe another week or it could go on for 2 years. And I don't really want to go that far into the future. That's usually why I relegate my fortune telling in a way to 2 or 3 weeks into the future, kind of like what I did with drawing up these yellow lines here in the southeast. I said that this is where the Russians are most likely going to go, and then it looked like the Russians went towards that direction. So I thank you very much for the support, once again, Super Creech, but I don't really think I could actually give you a very accurate statement on when the war will end and keep a straight face. I feel like I'd just be lying to give you an answer. So I'm going to have to plead ignorance on that in a way, but I do hope that I kind of answered the question on what I'm thinking about a war ending anytime soon. So thank you once again. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
All right, and next up, we have a $20 donation from Anthony Dobson again, and thank you very much for your continued support. He says, please don't insult Mr. Lunchtime. It's not his fault. He's so full of shite. He's eaten all the MREs. By the way, we should set up an Enforcer scope fund. You deserve it.
Well, I thank you very much for the support, and it's very interesting to know that you remember my comment about not getting a scope. I actually don't really have any guns that could equip a scope. The guns I own right now is a Krag Jorgensen and a 1903, and also some kind of semi-automatic shotgun made by Weatherby. So, and also the shotgun, like, the whole reason I got the shotgun is for home defense. So, you know, I'm not really one to get guns that usually can have a scope equipped on them. And I would never, oh my god, I would never, like, sporterize my Krag. My Krag will stay in the original condition it's in. And it's in fairly good condition, actually. I'm really happy with it. Sadly, it didn't come with a bayonet, though, but I still like it nonetheless. But yeah, I mean, like, a scope fun, well, I don't have any guns that could use a scope, but I mean, like, I won't complain if I got a scope. So I thank you very much for that part. And also talking about Mr. Lunchtime, I know it's not his fault. He's full of it. You know, he's of course eaten all the MREs, but I think he's gone on from eating MREs to he's eaten the artillery pieces themselves. Mr. Lunchtime is eating something out there. I think if they brought him to Chernobyl, he would clean up the radiation, because not only would he eat the elephant's foot, he would eat the entire reactor core of reactor number 4. Mr. Lunchtime is an unstoppable force, and I'm very scared of Mr. Lunchtime, to be honest with you, Anthony. But I do thank you so much for the support. I hope that does answer the question, and with that, we're going to move on to the next one.
All right, and at this point, we have about 12 super chats left. So up next, we have a $20 donation from Ann Towner, who says, my grandpa was drafted for World War III. World War III, huh. He had IQ, so he was rushed through medical school. He finished in 2 years, but after the war ended, the Army had to pay him back tuition with charity medical work, and it takes time to train troops. And hopefully, Ann, hopefully he wasn't drafted for World War III, or that would mean you came back from the future to tell us about that.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that. I was like, uh-oh. I was like, do we have a time traveler here? I just want everyone to know, Ann Towner is a time traveler. Apparently, we will be going into World War III sometime in the future. Sorry for the mispronunciations. Yeah, wah, blah, blah. I'm turning into a Charlie Brown adult. You know, I'm about to go wah, 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 wah. But anyways, thank you very much. Getting past the jokes, you know, but to answer that question, well, answer the comment. It does take time to train troops. I do agree. I don't know if you're a time traveler or not. If you were saying World War II, yes, I could see that. You know, because that was the most recent World War. And yeah, I would definitely say it does take time to train troops. And so while mobilizations sound great on paper, it does take time. You got to remember that in World War I, it wasn't only the Americans who had to mobilize, it was also the British as well. And that's where the whole Lord Kitchener's army and also the I Want You poster came from. You know, where the general with the big mustache is pointing at you on the poster. That's where that came from, and that was Britain's attempt in 1914 to mobilize their forces to go to war. So I hope that addresses the comment in a way. I entirely agree with you. It does take time to train troops, and with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have an $8 donation from Z Pilot who says, T72 brew sold as a whole bean with proceeds going to a Ukrainian charity would be sweet. So we can smash up the T72 beans and support Ukraine.
You know, I feel like that's something. Sadly, I don't think this channel would be able to do that just yet. We're not really to that level where we can actually kind of do something like that. But I know of a people out there who could do it, and I hope that they're watching this, and that they get on the ball and do that. I think that would be a great way to help out Ukraine, and also be a great way for people to get a nice coffee blend. So I thank you very much for the support. I entirely agree that would be a very cool idea to do. And so I thank you very much for the support. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next, we have an $8 donation from Martin Nielsen who says, imagine free and global Wi-Fi for anyone who cannot be controlled by mad dictators with eyes like dead fish. Would the world then be a safer place? And good morning from Copenhagen, Dip, Denmark.
Well, I'm glad you remember the Copenhagen dip joke I made about Copenhagen, Denmark. You know, it was just a joke once again. Copenhagen looks like a nice place. I would like to visit there eventually. But to answer that question, I believe it wouldn't be as, well, it may be a safer place. Well, that's kind of a little bit of a double-edged sword. Because while people would be able to get more access to information and knowledge, at the same time, governments could persecute these people for the knowledge they have, and then if they speak about it, that could get them in trouble. So I'm not really sure if it would protect them from people like Putin or Lukashenko or Xi Jinping or anyone like that. But I mean, like, you know, it would help them out in a way, but it would also hurt them in others. So I think that's kind of like a mixed thing there to me, honestly. I could see some benefits and disadvantages coming from it, but I do thank you very much for the support, and I hope that addresses what I'm thinking about it in a way. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next, we have a $5 donation from Rodrigo de Silva who says, watching this live while I enjoy my joy. I wish peace for all Ukraine people. Enforcer, are we getting closer to World War III or actually starting to get away from it?
I can't even really tell what's going on with the whole World War III thing at this point. It may be happening, it may not be happening. It seems like the tensions have simmered from the height that it's been so far, but it still looks like we're very close. We're much closer than we've been before. And so to answer that, I'm not really sure. I'm not going to weigh in either way at this point. I can't really tell which way it's going. It's kind of on the fence. To answer the other part of that question, could you reread it to me real quick, Matthew, to make sure I answer it?
I wish peace for all Ukrainian people, and are we getting closer to World War III?
Oh, yes. Well, I do wish peace on all the Ukrainian people as well. Of course, peace is something that they're fighting for, and hopefully they'll get it very soon. So I thank you very much for the support. I hope that does address all parts of that question. And with that, we're going to move on to the next one.
And I really can't believe my eyes, but we were paid a visit by Mr. Lunchtime, putting in a $5 donation. Mr. Lunchtime says, according to top U.S. spy chief, Putin is preparing to prolong the war. Great work, guys. I've been here since day 2. Fight, 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 Ukraine.
I cannot believe Mr. Lunchtime is here, everyone. We not only have such high figures as Funker 530 and other people watching the stream, Mr. Lunchtime himself has now come down to the stream, everyone. Can you believe that? I mean, we were able to draw in a crowd. I bet you Vladimir Putin's in here, and if I see a super chat from Vladimir Putin, I'm going to flip. But to answer the question, well, to answer the comment from Mr. Lunchtime about what's going on in Russia, I do believe that Putin looks like he is prolonging this war, and he is trying to attempt to start a war of attrition, kind of like how the Imperial Germans did in World War I. And I know everyone's getting tired of hearing that one, but we did see the Germans make incredible headway in the early months of the war in 1914, almost getting to Paris, just around 20 miles away. But of course, the miracle in the Marne occurred, and the front line started to stagnate, and then the Russians. Oh, well, not the Rush. What am I talking about? The Germans started to fortify their positions within France and started to try and set themselves up for the long run. Did it work? No. Did it prolong the war? Yes. So I do believe that the Russians may be trying to head down that avenue as well. But hopefully the Ukrainians, with their great will and determination, along with the support that they're getting from around the world, can push the Russians out nonetheless. So I thank you very much for the support, and I hope that does answer the question. And with that, we're going to move on to the next one.
And up next, we have a $5 donation from Kwai Gamer, who says Ukrainians are using kill rings like Finland. 1 ring equal 1 kill. I saw a captured Russian T-80 named Bunny. It had 24 white rings around the barrel.
Very interesting. I did not actually know that such a thing like that was occurring, but I do thank you very much for the information. And I do thank you very much for the support. I don't really know how to comment on that. I do know that that's something that actually happened in World War II as well. A lot of, German units would also do that on their tank barrels as well, as far as I know. And also some Russian tanks. So I thank you very much for the support. I hope that does address the comment in a way. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $5 donation from Nate R., who says, shout out from Maine. I've been a fan since day 5 and great work.
Well, I thank you very much for the support. It is, of course, great to hear from a maniac because you're from Maine. Also, Maine, for everyone to know, because while I am a huge salesman of the state of Alabama, my home state, Maine, of course, does have its selling points. For example, lobsters. Maine is known for lobsters. That's one thing I know for sure. And, of course, I would highly suggest going up there and visiting Maine. Every single state in the United States does have a special little thing going for it. But of course, I will always be a huge fan of my home state of Alabama. I will live here and die here in Alabama. Huge fan, will never leave. Been around the world too. Now I've got to say, I always come back to Alabama and I just really enjoy the very polite Southern people we have here in Alabama. Very special kind. You won't find them anywhere else. And so with that, thank you so much for the support. It is cool to hear you are from Maine, and I do like to hear shout outs from around the world in the Leaf Spring Army. And so with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have one from Vasily, who puts in a $5 donation and says, that pontoon bridge is allegedly destroyed by a proactive engineer, as claimed in his Twitter story. Very cool story, and this has been a key victory.
Well, I thank you very much for the support, and that is an incredible story to hear that a proactive engineer destroyed that bridge, leading to the destruction of a couple of Russian vehicles. So I thank you very much for sharing that information with us. I actually didn't know that that was part of that story, and it is good to hear a little bit more clarification about it. So thank you once again for the support, and with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next, we have a super chat from Ninos GLG, who says, why aren't the Russians getting any satellite views and intel on Ukrainian positions? Do they not have the same capabilities with satellites and intel?
I don't think they do. Let's pull up if the Russians have any satellites. Does Russia have any military satellites? I'm sure they do, but it's not really a high number. Russia currently has around 100 military or dual-purpose satellites. How many does the United States have? Does the U.S., not the IS, the U.S. have military satellites? How many military satellites does the United States have? Number of military satellites. According to this chart, the United States has 123. Russia has 74. But then again, do they work? Because we don't really see the Russians gathering any information on the Ukrainians. It always looks like they're getting the drop on themselves being committed. And so I think that in terms of the Russians using military satellites, highly unlikely. Because we don't really see them reaping a lot of information from them if they have them and are using them. So I thank you very much for the support. I kind of hope that answers the question. And with that, we're going to move on to the next one.
And up next, we have a $5 donation from Humble Potato, who says, I love the Mr. Lunchtime nickname you gave that Husky Rooski. I have a cat I've nicknamed Lunchbox because he's a chunk.
Thank you very much for the support. And yeah, that was actually something that I thought would not be too funny, really, when I was making that. I was going through these news bulletins and I was just looking at stuff, and I looked at this guy, this absolute unit of a man who eats at least 5 plates of pancakes every morning. And I thought, I'm just going to call him Mr. Lunchtime. You know, and I thought it was going to be cheesy, but a lot of people loved it. And so it's actually really crazy. I thought that wouldn't work, but Mr. Lunchtime apparently was hilarious. So I like that a lot. Thank you very much for the support once again, for the creativity of the naming. And with that, thank you so much for the support. And we're going to move on to the next question.
And moving on to the next question, we have a $5 donation from CA Lags, who says, no wonder the Russians have logistics issues. Mr. Lunchtime is using up all the supplies.
Dude, everyone loves Mr. Lunchtime now. Yes, Mr. Lunchtime is eating up Russian supplies. That man eats the rations of 300, well, a whole entire BTG per day. He also drinks raw gasoline, and that also ties into Russian logistical issues, because so many fuel trucks have to be used to keep him going. So I have to agree, Mr. Lunchtime may be the reason that Russian logistics are falling apart. I can't believe that Mr. Lunchtime is making such an impact on everyone like this. I think he's about to become one of the next channel jokes, but I thank you so much for the support. I'm going to bring that up to Starsky. I'm actually going to send him a meme I saw on our meme page on Discord. By the way, if you're not a part of the Discord, go join it. It's a very neat place, very cool community. It's Leaf Spring Army people. But yes, I've seen that meme in the meme chat on the Discord about Mr. Lunchtime. I'm actually going to share that with Starsky. Hopefully he gets a pretty good laugh out of it as well. So I thank you very much for the support. I hope that does address the comment in a way about Mr. Lunchtime. And so with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next, we have a $5 donation from Big Dog CNC again, who says, ammonium nitrate is a solid, same as in the Beirut explosion. Brown clouds, most likely nitrogen dioxide.
Well, thank you very much for the support. I did not actually know that. So that's a very good clarification to get, and it does help us out a lot. One thing that's kind of wild to me right now is that I'm somehow hanging in here. I thought I wouldn't be able to, but I'm actually here. But I do thank you very much for the support. I hope that does address the comment. And I was just making that realization right there when I only stuttered for the first time in a while, and I was like, wow, I've gone filming today once again for like 12 hours, and I got home, started working on this. I haven't had a break, and somehow I'm here. So like I was like, wow, that's cool. I just had like a retrospective moment there. But I hope that answers the question. Thank you so much for the support. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have one from BSG Wolf, who says, nitric acid Coke fund.
I thank you very much. I've always wanted a nitric acid Coke. So thank you once again for the support. I hope that does address the super chat in a way. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a super chat from Diffuse56, who says, I'm in love with the woman from Mariupol holdouts.
Well, I mean, everyone's got their preferences. I mean, like, hey, you know, she may be single. Go ask her. But I thank you very much for the support. I don't really want to comment on that. That kind of seems a little weird, you know, about a fight, you know, fighters and soldiers and stuff, and going, oh, you know, that one's like kind of hot. You know, I kind of want to assess them more for their fighting qualities and their patriotism more so than their looks in a way. But I do thank you very much for the support. I hope that does address it in a way, and that is interesting to hear from you, Diffuse56. So thank you once again. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And Big Dog CNC puts in another super chat and says, any thoughts on the diesel shortage we're about to experience in the Southeast?
I haven't really been keeping up on that all too much. I only drive when I'm actually filming because I stay here and work all day long, every day. So I haven't really known a lot about the gas and diesel shortages and such things that are going to be happening here in the South. But if there is one that is going to be happening, that is going to be a serious cause for concern that the U.S. government will have to look into and try and fix, because it's not something that's going to happen and then everyone just turns a blind eye to. It's going to be something that the government must fix because vehicles that operate on diesel must keep functioning. So thank you very much for the support. I hope that answers the question. And with that, we're going to move on to the next one.
And next up, we have one from DD Reynolds, who says, do you think Mr. Lunchtime likes shrimp bacon? And he probably does not discriminate. He probably eats everything that comes in
Man,
his
I mean,
path.
Mr. Lunchtime is literally eating depleted uranium right now, man. I mean, like, he will eat bacon shrimp. I mean, like, what, are you kidding? Like, that sounds like the most fattening thing I could think of, man. Like, he's going to be eating bacon shrimp, you know? Like, look at the man. Let's go back and look at him one more time. Tell me this man would not eat bacon shrimp. This man's gonna eat bacon shrimp. Look at him. Oh my lord. But yeah, I hope that answers the question. I'm about to break down here laughing about everyone talking about Mr. Lunchtime. So with that, I thank you so much for the support. I hope that answers the question. And with that, we're gonna move on to the next one.
And real quick, Didi also said, thank you for being amazing, informative, and hilarious in these dark times in Slava Ukraine.
Well, I thank you so much for the support. Sometimes I don't intend to be that hilarious, like Mr. Lunchtime is just kind of supposed to be like a cheesy joke, but everyone loves it so much. So, yes, I do thank you very much for enjoying it. Of course, I try sometimes, but sometimes I don't, like that one, and then it's just like landing on success right there with Mr. Lunchtime. So, thank you once again for the support. I hope that does address the whole entire like question / comment in a way, and I am very appreciative that you do enjoy the stream. So with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $5 donation from Montern, who says, love from Wales. Britain signed a defense pact with both Finland and Sweden. Slava Ukraine.
I did hear that, and it is, of course, wonderful to see that the British are standing up for the neutral countries in more so Eastern Europe. It is, of course, wonderful to see, and hopefully the Russians will take that seriously, and the British will hold up their end of the deal if anything comes to shove, if you know what I mean. So I thank you very much for the support once again, and with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $5 donation from a random trip who says, if Ukraine happens to win before or after their independence in around August, then it means the Russians are going to have 40,000 or more killed in action.
Yes, that is true. And that will be a high amount of losses that the Russians will have taken, especially in a modern war. Those kinds of losses are unheard of for a major country in a modern war. And that will be something that will be a massive cultural shock to the Russians, considering that they will most likely have been defeated at that time. So I hope that answers the question. I thank you very much for the support. And with that, we're going to move on to the next one.
And next up, we have a $15 donation from Tangent Bragiri again. So thank you very much for your support. And they say, thanks for a great job, guys, and have a beer on me.
Well, I thank you very much for the support. And we will certainly have a beer on you. So thank you once again. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $5 donation from Laszlo Uriel, who says, Mr. Lunchtime isn't fat, he's big boned. Thanks for everything, Enforcers.
Well, I thank you very much for the support. And man, I mean, if Mr. Lunchtime is big boned, Mr. Lunchtime is like made of calcium or something. Like that's got to be big bone to the next level. But I do thank you very much for the support and the joke. And with that, I thank you once again, and we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $5 donation from Jonathan Toe, who says, a weird fact about MREs is that they are also designed to constipate.
Really? That's interesting. I actually did not know that. I thought, I did not, I really didn't know that. That's new to me. So I thank you very much for the info. I actually didn't know that that was part of their design. So thank you once again for the support and sharing that info with us. And before we move on, okay, I've got to answer something from the live chat, Matthew. You're going to bust out laughing at this one. Freddie Mars says the 50-mile convoy was Mr. Lunchtime's MREs.
Oh my goodness.
That's gold. Thank you so much, Freddie Mars, for being here and putting that in, because that was hilarious. But thank you so much once again for the great joke. That was the best. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
Okay, and next up we have a $5 donation from Zyber Sniper 1 again, who says, if World War III starts, will we see the Winter War Part 2 in Finland? By the way, my birthday is actually on the 4th of July.
Really? Well, lucky you. You get to celebrate independence. You get fireworks for free on your birthday, man. Congratulations. I like that. Pretty cool. And also, to answer that question, if World War III did break out, Winter War Part 2 would not happen, because the war, if it was to happen now, would most likely start in the summer. So it would actually be the Summer War Part 1. or I guess you could say the continuation war part 2, if you want to call it that. But I could see that. I could if the war occurred during the winter, but it looks like it would occur during the summer. But I hope that does address the question in a way, and I do thank you so much for the support. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $5 donation from Ned J10, who says, war on attrition does not work as well when the other side deploys combat drones. Slava Ukraine.
I do agree. It does appear to not be a working strategy, considering that the Ukrainians are using drones to a very effective degree and are wiping out Russian units left and right by dropping bomblets on them and other various munitions, because all of them aren't bomblets. Sometimes they're just literally RPG shells that they're dropping on them. But I do have to agree that it's not working out well for the Russians at all. Also, another thing, Matthew, is we've had a continuation on the 50-kilometer convoy. Kevin's Keys said, wrong. The 50-kilometer convoy was Mr. Lunchtime's Grubhub order.
Oh my god. People were killing me with these comments.
I mean, honestly, they crack me up, y'all. I'd love these jokes. They're pretty funny. Y'all, a lot of y'all are really creative. But with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And I just saw another one. Bouncing Ship said, psychological logical warfare. Microwave the hell out of a guy till he starts hearing stuff and his brain fries like an egg. I have no idea where that came from, but that's something else.
That's pretty brutal. But anyways, thank you very much for the support. Isn't that Havana syndrome?
That actually might be that.
Yeah, that sounds like Havana syndrome, actually. But I do thank you very much for saying that. It's interesting, and it sounds like Havana syndrome to me. But with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $5 donation from Hegemony Cricket, who says, the Russian soldier that was caressing the side of the helicopter was pointing out a bullet hole that had been patched.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, like, honestly, though, nah, we're not going there with that joke. But I do thank you very much for the support, and I also thank you for clarifying that. I thought that was just simply some kind of plate that they put on the side of the helicopter during production. I didn't actually know that that was a patch for a bullet hole. So thank you once again for the support. I didn't know that. So thank you for clarifying that. And thank you once again. I've said thank you about 5 times now. But with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $4 donation from T. Rose, who says, let's keep the Leaf Spring Army moving forward.
And I thank you so much for the support, and hopefully we will keep the army moving forward. If you want this army moving forward, say Slava Leaf Springs in the chat, because this army will never stop going. So I thank you once again for the support, and with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $5 donation from Jude Domnail. I'm not sure how you say that really, but sorry for butchering your name. They say, Mr. Lunchtime doesn't need body armor for obvious reasons. Also, hide your dogs from him or Ukrainians.
Well, thank you very much for the support, and it's a good Mr. Lunchtime joke. I'm liking it. So I thank you very much for the support. Pretty good stuff. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $4 donation from a longtime channel regular, Junebug72. Thank you very much for your continued support of the channel. As always, we appreciate it. Up next, we have a $2 donation from G. Scott Deary, who says, love y'all, keep up the good work.
And I thank you so much for the support, and we will try as best as we can. So thank you once again, and thank you for helping us to be able to continue on doing this good work. So with that, on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $2 donation from Ann Towner, who corrects the earlier super chat and says, World War II is what I meant. I don't have a TARDIS, sadly. I need sleep.
Oh, that's fine. Go get some sleep. Everyone needs sleep. I get decent sleep. Well, I get okay sleep, but make sure to keep well rested. Everyone, of course, rest is incredibly important, and it helps you to continue your daily functions as best as possible. Sleep cannot be stated as its importance. So thank you once again for the support. Thank you for clarifying that for us. It clearly seemed to be World War II. It just seemed like you mistyped it. So thank you once again. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $2 donation from D.D. Reynolds again, who says, Mr. Lunchtime merch, I'd buy a hat for sure. And D.D., I am going to put that on the design list, and when we start drafting designs again, I'm definitely going to work on some Mr. Lunchtime merch, because I think that's pretty popular.
Honestly, I think I'll make an exception to the Ukraine rule on that one, because it's really about Mr. Lunchtime and not anything about Ukraine. And so yeah, I guess, I mean, like, I guess I would probably do that one. So, thank you very much for the support, and you may be looking forward to that here in the future, because Mr. Lunchtime was a pretty funny one, I have to agree, and the jokes coming out about him are hilarious. So, thank you once again, and with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next, we have another Mr. Lunchtime joke from Kevin Scott 76. He says, Mr. Lunchtime is completely stopped up by 9,000 MREs.
Well, he looks like he's bursting at the seams and he's about to explode. But I do thank you very much for the support and another joke on Mr. Lunchtime. So with that, I thank you once again, and we're going to move on to the next question.
And real quick, before we move on to our last super chat of the night, to everybody who has reached out to me and said they want to design something for a potential merch item, please feel free to reach out to us in the Discord. We are totally open to designs if you want to submit one to us, and we actually appreciate the help. At the moment, I'm the one designing the merch, so I love inspiration and help. So if you want to send that over to us, feel free in the Discord, and we'd love to see it. Up next, well, actually, we have one more super chat as well, but the next one is from Willness, who puts in a $5 donation and says, I'm pretty sure that your work will go into history as well. Slava Leaf Spring.
Well, I thank you very much for the support. Glad to see we have a Leaf Spring Army soldier here. We have been thinking about the Leaf Spring Army rank things with the shirts, because that sounded really cool as well. I like that idea. Hope Matthew's written that down as a note for a design idea in the future. I hear him scribbling over there right now. But to answer the comment in a way, I don't know if this will go into history. I'm just trying to do my service right now the way I feel is right. And if it goes down in history and it was something special, then it was something special, and I'll be happy for it. But if it just kind of like fades away into the pages of history and, you know, it's never heard or talked about again, I'm happy with that. I raised, at the moment, around $250,000 in support of Ukraine, and I think that's about the best I could have ever done under any circumstances in terms of support for that country. So I thank you so much for the support, and of course the high regards and praise. And you know, one can only wonder what the future will hold for this the stream and the channel at large. So thank you once again, and with that, we're going to move on to the last super chat of the night, and then we're going to get to some of the live chat questions.
And real quick, if you're looking for our Discord server, we do have a link down in the description, and it should let you into the server. So our last super chat of the night goes to Honest M, who puts in a $5 donation and says, Mr. Lunchtime is the whole Frontline. He is considered the Great Wall of Ukraine.
That's one of the best ones I've heard, honestly. Wait a minute. Are you serious about that though? Because look at this man. He's not the Great Wall of Ukraine. This man is the mountain. This man is the Caucasus Mountain Range. He's no wall, man. He's like, he's the shield for all the Luhansk Republic. This man is something. Oh my god, you know, it just hit me, y'all. I'm kind of losing it here because the Mr. Lunchtime thing is the funniest thing that I've ever heard on this channel. But what if this guy finds out in the future that there's a stream on YouTube and there was hundreds of thousands of people on here that were making fun of him? I mean, I think that would be more emotionally devastating to him than missing breakfast. So with that, thank you very much for the support. And with that, we're now going to move on to the comments from the live chat.
And for our first comment from the live chat, we have one from KB, who says, who would take over if Putin died from his alleged illnesses? Would they be worse?
Well, we've answered that question a couple of times, but the one person I'm thinking that seems to be in the logical line of succession to power in Russia would be Medvedev, considering that he is the prime minister of Russia, which seems to be the next in line. We could, of course, pull that up, which we will actually do. Line of succession in Russia. Heir. What? List of heirs to the Russian throne. Okay, yeah, that's not what we're looking for. Who's the line of succession? Fortunately, I can't really find a straight answer immediately. I would assume it'd be Medvedev. So I'm just going to go with that. I'm going to assume it'd be Medvedev, considering he's the prime minister. It seems like that would be the next step up from prime minister, would be president. So I hope that answers the question, and we're going to move on to the next one.
Okay. And Enforcer, would you like me to read off a few of the Mr. Lunchtime jokes real quick from the live chat?
Yes, I would love
Okay. So first up, we have one from Scott, who says, if Mr. Lunchtime finds out about this stream, we would all be on the menu.
that. Dude, he would come through and eat up my, like, Wi-Fi. Maybe that's what's happening. Maybe that's why we're having internet issues here, is because Mr. Lunchtime has been trying to eat up our internet connection. That may be the reason why. I love that, though. On to the next one.
Up next, we have one from the Sockeye Salmon, who says, Mr. Lunchtime was asked, do you like children? His response was, yes, with mustard and mayo.
Oh, no. Not only is he Michael Jackson, but he's eating them. So I thank you very much for the joke. That was a pretty interesting one, and we're on to the next one.
And for the moment, it looks like that's going to be all for the moment. So with that being said, we're moving on to our next live chat question. And the next one we have is from Woody Stems, who says, will the greater additional range of the newest artillery now operational in Ukraine make a big strategic difference?
The answer to that question is yes. It will make a large strategic difference, because if your artillery is able to fire at the enemy artillery, well, at enemy units and towards enemy artillery without being in range of the latter, then that means that they will be practically safe. So it will make a huge difference, because now Ukrainian artillery may not be in the jeopardy it once was conducting artillery fire missions. So I hope that answers the question, and with that, on to the next one.
And next up, we have one from Stephen Hall, who says, Enforcer, is it true that just one F-35 would put an end to the Russian invasion in just 48 hours?
Could you read that one again?
He said, Enforcer, is it true that just one F-35 would put an end to the Russian invasion in just 48 hours?
I don't think that would be true. It would probably do a lot to curb the war, at least in air superiority. But in terms of turning the whole entire war around in 48 hours from one aircraft, I would consider that a little bit of a stretch. I wouldn't put that much faith into a single unit of a single kind of weapon or vehicle. So unfortunately, I would say no. I don't think it would turn around the war in 48 hours. I think it would take a decent amount of them, like a whole entire air wing of them, to do that. But I thank you very much for the support. Well, not the support, the question, and I hope that answers it. And with that, we're going to answer 2 more questions from the live chat, and then we're going to round out tonight's stream.
All right. So up next here, we have a question from Packrat, who says, I know the concerns of Finland or Sweden joining NATO could spark World War III. What other concerns should we look at during their process of potentially applying in the coming days and weeks?
I wouldn't really know how to answer that question. I'm going to have to declare ignorance on that one, because I believe that situation is a little bit out of my wheelhouse, especially considering that it's concerning NATO affairs, and I don't really know a lot about NATO laws or I guess you could say their process. So unfortunately, I won't be able to answer that one. So I hate to say it, but I'm going to have to plead ignorance on that. But with that, we're going to move on to the last question for the night, and then we're going to round out tonight's stream.
All right, and the last one of the night goes to John Kaler, who says, how many days of tanks do Russians have left at 15 a day? Could all be gone by the 4th of July?
It's possible. I'm not going to rule it out. It is entirely possible that they could all be, well, most of them could be wiped out by the 4th of July. The Russians are probably not stupid enough to throw everything they have at the front lines and try and wipe out their entire tank force. But then again, Russians haven't been setting a good precedent during this war, so I don't really have high hopes for them. So I hope that answers the question, and I do thank you very much for it. And with that, we've reached the end of tonight's stream. I thank you all once again so much for watching. If you are new to the stream, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. We do run these streams every single day of the week, except for Mondays at 10 p.m. Eastern Time, covering the past 24 hours of the war in Ukraine. Once again, it's been a pleasure for me to report the news to y'all of the past day here in Ukraine on day 77. We, of course, have seen that the Ukrainians continue to win, and hopefully they will continue to do so in the future. And we will see about that tomorrow. So, thank you all once again, and I will see y'all all in the next episode. Thank you, and take care. Slava Ukraini, Rom Slava.